Chapter 1743. When her regret and fear reached the extreme, she exploded. Her eyes emitted blue light, and layers of blue light suddenly gushed out from her body. That was the ice crystal devil light. After the devil light was emitted, everything under her feet began to freeze, and layers of ice spread outwards. Her position as the devil clan's guardian was not obtained out of thin air. She still had some practical skills. This ice crystal devil light was her specialty, which could instantly turn the entire space into water. She wanted to use this technique to escape completely with the water escape technique. The reason why Shinjuli talked so much nonsense with her was that he was waiting for her to use this trick. When the ice spread to his feet, he suddenly flicked his finger at Gong Huanyan. Gong Huanyan screamed. Suddenly, there was nothing under her feet, and she fell into the groove. Below her was rolling lava-like things. She struggled in it for a while, popped her head out once, and then disappeared completely. There was a faint red light flashing in that direction. That was the sole light of the devil clan. At the same time, Shinjuli drove the turntable under his feet. At the same time, he took out the prepared voice-transmitting talisman, closed his eyes slightly, and gave the final order, start. Her heart was flustered, and she felt as if she was about to lose something, causing her heart to tighten. Amo's eyes were fixed on the voice-transmitting talisman. She did not know if she wanted him to start earlier or later. She suddenly had an idea to throw away the voice-transmitting talisman and then run to the central array to find him. But as soon as this idea rushed out, it was pushed back into her mind. If she did that, she would be crazy. She forced herself to take a deep breath, then another, to stabilize her mind. Suddenly, she realized that she still had a very important question to ask him. For example, what was the grudge between them 50,000 years ago? He kept talking about what happened 50,000 years ago. It was obvious that he had recovered his memory, but she did not. This was too unfair. As soon as this idea came out, it burned in her heart like a fire. She finally found a legitimate reason to look for him. In a fit of anger, she turned around and wanted to jump down from where she was standing. Fortunately, Yi Tianli had been paying attention to her. Seeing this, he grabbed her. "Imo, where are you going?" Imo subconsciously said, "I still have something to ask him." Yi Tianli almost rubbed his forehead. "Imo, as the Supreme Divinity said, you can't come back down once you're in this place. If you have any questions for him, you can wait until the seal is complete. You'll have plenty of time to ask him, right?" Imo had been hot-blooded just now, which was why he had almost disregarded the bigger picture and acted rashly. Now that he had regained his senses, he stood in place. "What's wrong with me today?" Shinjuli was a little crazy today, and it also made him a little crazy. Even if he wanted to go into seclusion, he would have to wait until he came out, right? If he had any questions, he could ask him after this matter was over. There was no need to rush. As soon as she stood still, the special sound-transmitting talisman in her hand lit up. She steeled her heart and accepted the call. Shinjuli's calm and steady voice came from it. "Begin." Everything had been agreed upon in advance. Even the position and the amount of force to be used had been clearly stated. Everything had been explained clearly. So, under Shinjuli's command, the 8 groups each started their own roulette. A strange sound came from under their feet. Everyone in the 8 groups used all their strength. Chapter 1744. Imo was no exception. She used her magical power and drove the turntable under her feet with Yi Tianli. The turntable seemed to be carrying a heavy object, and it spun slowly inch by inch. Although the 8 groups were in 8 directions, the speed of the turntable was extremely coordinated, and the 8 turntables spun at the same frequency. It was very tiring to spin. Before the turntable was half turned, Yi Tianli's forehead was sweating, and his legs were sore. He looked at Imo again. She was pursing her lips all the time. Except that her face was a little pale, there was nothing wrong with her. On the main turntable in the center, Shinjuli had already sat down with his legs crossed. He closed his eyes and made gestures. Countless light red lights were emitted from his body. Combined with the light blue ice crystals made by Gong Huanyan, they intertwined around the main turntable, and soon formed a closed space like a lotus bud. Outside the space, There were red lotuses blooming one after another. As the turntable under his feet moved inch by inch, the gate embedded in the ground not far from the turntable slowly opened a gap. There seemed to be all kinds of cries and howls from the gap. Many light red shadows rushed out from the gate, but they directly hit the lotus bud set by Shinjuli, and then attached to it, as if there was something delicious on it. They desperately sucked it, shaking their heads and wagging their tails as they drilled into the bud. The gap of the gate was getting bigger and more light red shadows flew out. In a moment, the outer circle of the lotus bud had been occupied by the light red shadows, and it was almost impossible to see the original shape. In the bud, Shinjuli's face was getting paler and paler. The lotus bud he set was condensed by his divine power and divine blood. For those red shadows, it was a delicacy that they could not throw away. Those purple fiends that were originally erupting outwards also seemed to have smelled something delicious. Suddenly, they turned back like huge dragons and rushed towards this lotus bud. The lotus bud was delicious to those red shadows, and the red shadows were delicious to the purple evil. The purple evil turned back and directly rolled the lotus bud, wanting to swallow it together. Obviously, it could not swallow it, but like those red shadows, once it bit it, it could not let go. As the golden red turntable turned 180 degrees, the door opened completely. Suddenly, there was an earth-shattering sound between heaven and earth. The lotus bud suddenly broke away from the turntable and rolled toward the door. Naturally, Zisha also followed it and rolled away. Aimo and Yi Tianli had just turned the roulette to 180 degrees when they heard an earth-shattering sound. The space above their heads suddenly cracked open, and their bodies involuntarily bounced upwards, rushing directly towards the crack. Between heaven and earth, rumbling sounds could be heard incessantly. The mountain collapsed. Aimo was sent flying into the sky by that inexplicable force. The force was too great, so great that she couldn't resist it. By the time she had completely stabilized her body, she was already in mid-air. The people from the other 7 groups also shot up one after another. All of them were still in shock as they looked down. Then, everyone held their breaths. The entire mountain was collapsing. All the purple specters in the 8 places where the purple specters emerged were rapidly retreating, like a whale sucking in a river. At the very center, it was also collapsing, revealing a huge hole. All the purple fiend was gathering in that huge hole and drilling into it. The giant cave was like an enormous black hole, sucking in everything around it. Purple evil huge rocks trees. Chapter 1745. Those things flew in crazily and then disappeared. Everything rolled into the black hole. It was a spectacular scene. The original mountain peak had disappeared, and the original landscape had undergone an earth-shattering change, causing everyone present to be dumbfounded. The purple haze that was spreading outside quickly disappeared, and the sky slowly became clear again. Aimo stood there. After she glanced down, her eyes started to wander around. Her eyes quickly scanned the people around her, and then her heart sank inch by inch. Shuailan, Heaven Sovereign, the 4 guardians of the demon clan, the state preceptor of the human realm, Yi Tianli, the celestial generals. Everyone from the 8 sealed groups had ascended. Not a single one of them was missing. But what about Shinjuli? What about Gong Huanyan? Why didn't his group come up? Why didn't he come up? The collapsed ground was where he was. Could it be that he didn't have time to escape? Was he sucked into the black hole? Impossible. They were all involuntarily ejected. It didn't make sense that he wasn't ejected too. His martial arts were so high. It was impossible that he didn't have any way to defend himself. If they could come out, it didn't make sense that he couldn't. Or maybe he came out early and didn't want to see her again. So he left early? What about Gong Huanyan? Did he leave with her too? This didn't seem like his style. Her gaze anxiously swept across everyone's faces. Not a single one of the people from the 3 realms, who had rushed over to save the situation, had left. Everyone stood in the air, looking at the collapsed ground, watching this rare spectacle. Everyone was here except for him and Gong Huanyan. Momo. Shuailan looked for Aimo first. He glanced down and fixed his eyes on her. Then he rushed over. Are you okay? You don't look good. Shuailan, did you see the divine? Supreme Divinity come up? IMO asked immediately. Shuailan shook his head. No, I came up later than you. The 8 groups of people were ejected one after another. It seemed that Amo's group was the first to be ejected. Demon Lord. Your group is the first to arrive. A minor immortal beside him replied. Amo's gaze immediately landed on Xiaoxian. You've been watching all this time? Yes, Demon Lord. Ever since you entered, we have been guarding the perimeter. The Supreme Divinity has ordered that before this place is sealed, not even a fly can be let out. Then did you see the Divine Lord's group come up? The immortal shook his head and replied straightforwardly. No, Demon Master. This immortal said that your group was the first to arrive. Hidden in his sleeves, Imo clenched his fists. He thought to himself, perhaps this Xiaoxian's skills are too shallow, so she didn't notice it. Thus she continued to ask a few more people, those from the celestial realm, those from the devil realm, those from the demon realm. In the end, she had asked all the people who had been guarding outside, but none of them had seen Shenjuli come out. Amo's heart grew heavier and heavier, but his legs grew weaker and weaker. Shuailan had been by her side the whole time. He seemed to be saying something to her, but she didn't hear anything. There were only a few scenes in his mind. Will you be sad if I die? No. I will celebrate with gongs and drums. After this is over, I will be in isolation for a period of time. I will need you to take care of Nianma. This is hard to say. Sealing this main array will consume a lot of my power. I can't say for sure if I will be in isolation for a few thousand years. Chapter 1746. Imo, you won't miss me, right? It's nothing. The next time we meet, it will be 1,000 years later. This is my farewell ceremony. I want you to remember me for 1,000 years because of this hug. She stared at the big black hole that was still swallowing everything. A thought came to her mind. Did he pay the price of his life for this seal? Is he dead? Farewell ceremony. That was his farewell ceremony. He left just like that. When this thought came to her mind, her heart fell into an abyss. She couldn't help but put her hand on her chest. At that moment, it was as if the pain came again. There was a sweet taste in her throat, as if his blood was surging in her throat. How could she not know that when her heart was at its most painful, he was stuffing his finger into her mouth, and she was sucking his blood? When he waved his hand to break the wizardry barrier, she saw with her own eyes the deep teeth marks on his finger. She felt hot and cold at the same time. Her head was also dizzy. Since she regained her memory, she knew that she still hated him. She hated him for locking her up because of Wumo. She hated him for indiscriminately giving her a slap. She hated him for taking another woman away and leaving her behind. She hated him for always protecting that woman and letting her experience the tribulation and turn into ashes. Layers upon layers of hatred piled up and formed a knot in her heart that wouldn't go away. While she hated him, she also sadly found out that she still loved him. She never knew that there would be a day when she would love someone to this extent. Even if her heart was filled with hatred, she still cared about him. Especially when he hugged her in his arms. She was still shamelessly greedy for his smell and the warmth of his embrace. However, with the accumulation of hatred, she couldn't say anything to admit defeat. She said those words to him, not to hurt him, but to remind herself Shuailan had been following her. He saw her staring at the black hole with a pale face. He couldn't help but worry. Momo. He's dead, isn't he? Imo suddenly asked softly. Shuailan choked. He also looked at the black hole. In such a situation, even Shenjuli might not be able to escape, right? But that person was a god. How could he die? Momo, he might not be dead. He's a god. Then why didn't he come up? Everyone else has already come up. Why isn't he coming up? Imo seemed to be asking him, but at the same time, it also seemed like he was asking himself. Shuailan couldn't answer her question. Imo's expression was so empty that Shuailan had a bad premonition. He reached out to pull her. Momo. Imo's bright red figure was already falling into the black hole like a meteor. She only left one sentence in the air. I'm going down to take a look. Momo. Shuailan's complexion changed greatly. He shouted and subconsciously chased after him. Momo. Danger. Come back. The black hole had the power to swallow everything. Even though they were far away, they could still feel the terrifying suction force of the black hole. If Imo rushed down, she might not be able to come up. However, how could Shui Yilan's speed compare to Imo's? He watched as her body fell into the black hole along with the rolling boulders and trees. He didn't even catch a corner of her clothes. Chapter 1747. His blood rushed to his head, and he wanted to jump down as well. However, he was held back by his subordinates. Your Majesty, you can't. Shui Yilan had used up a lot of demonic energy to activate the seal. His body was held back by his 4 subordinates, and he could not rush down. More demons surrounded him. These people pulled at his arms and legs, desperately trying to drag him away from this terrifying area. What a joke. It wasn't easy for their demon emperor to come back. It wasn't easy for the demon race to have some good days. How could the demon race allow anything to happen to their demon emperor? Jumping in there was simply courting death. As for the demon race's subordinates, they naturally did not want their demon lord to jump in. However, Imo's movements were too fast. Furthermore, the demon race had contributed a lot this time. 4 male and 4 female demon protectors had all moved out. Now they were half dead. By the time they reacted and wanted to chase after him, Imo's figure had already disappeared into the black hole. The supreme god did not come up, and the demon lord suddenly rushed down. Everyone was stunned. Even the Sky Emperor had a complicated expression. The other people in the celestial realm also looked at each other. Yi Tianli wanted to go down and take a look, but was held back by the Sky Emperor. You can't go to that place. Why? That is the reincarnation death ground. No one can come out after going in. The Sky Emperor was quite knowledgeable. He stood there for a moment and saw the clues. Yi Tianli's expression changed. Then what about the Supreme God and the Demon Lord? Could it be that they could not come up? The Sky Emperor looked down and sighed softly. I only hope that they can be blessed. Shui Yilan also heard the Sky Emperor's words from afar. His face was pale as he looked down. His heart seemed to be rolling like the waves of the sea. 3 lives. After 3 lives, no matter who she was reborn as, she still loved Shinjuli. Shui Imo was also like this. In order to resurrect Shinjuli, she was willing to commit suicide in a different world, suffering the torment of a heavenly calamity star for all eternity. It was even more so for Ning Xuema. Even though he had imprisoned her for 10 years, he still couldn't win her heart. The one she liked and loved was still Shinjuli. Her happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy had always been related to Shinjuli. Imo still loved Shinjuli. Before they entered the purple demon array, he had seen her stare blankly in the direction of Shinjuli a few times when they were roasting game below. Perhaps she didn't realize it herself, or perhaps she hid her emotions very well. But how could Shui Yilan, who had been paying attention to her, not notice it? She was the person he loved with his life, but her happiness and anger had nothing to do with him. At most, she treated him as a friend. No matter how much effort he put in, it would still be the same. He stood in the air in a daze. The demons around him were eyeing him covetously, ready to pounce on him at any time. Shui Yilan's heart was filled with sorrow, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. Momo, even if she died, she probably wouldn't want me to accompany her, right? The people around him suddenly shouted in a low voice. The black hole is gone. Shui Yilan's heart sank. He looked down and saw that the black hole had indeed disappeared. The flying dust below almost covered the sky. When the dust settled, the black hole was indeed gone, and an extremely tall mountain appeared in its place. The mountain was tall and majestic, and it was actually no different from before. The tall trees on the mountain peak covered the sky. Chapter 1748. The mountain peak was towering, and looked exactly the same as before. The tall trees on the mountain peak covered the sky and the sun. Apes and birds were chirping. It was a peaceful atmosphere. It was as if the landslide was just a nightmare. When they woke up from the nightmare, everything would be back to normal. Everyone stood in the sky stunned. After the dust settled, some of the bolder ones couldn't help but fly down to check. Shui Yilan also staggered and flew down. After a long while, he leaned against a big tree with a pale face. The place where he and Imo roasted game was still there. He could even find a few pieces of burned wood and the skin of the rabbit. But the purple smoke had disappeared. The array that was once exposed also disappeared. Of course, the entrance of the array was also gone. The original entrance was a big rock as high as a small hill. Shuailan didn't give up. He summoned all of his subordinates to move the boulder away. After these demons used all of their strength to move the boulder away with great difficulty, what appeared in front of them was not the entrance, but yet another boulder. He moved several big rocks in succession, but found that the inside was solid. It looked like the soil and stones hadn't been moved for thousands of years. Obviously, there was no entrance here. Or it could be said that the original entrance to the formation was simply an illusion and did not truly exist in this mountain. Momo. Shuailan lost all his strength. He slowly sat down and leaned against a big rock. He couldn't get up anymore. Momo, you don't even want your own child for that person? The power of the purple evil spirit was extremely amazing. The rolling purple evil spirit wrapped everything that could be wrapped into a tornado and flew into the big hole. As soon as Aemo got close to the big hole, she was directly swept into the purple evil tornado. Broken trees, thousands of tons of big rocks. They all rotated around her with the purple evil spirit. The purple evil spirit seemed to have the power to destroy everything. Those big trees, big rocks, and other things turned into dust after rolling in the purple evil tornado for a while. If Aemo didn't have a protective enchantment around her, she would have been melted by the purple evil spirit. The current Zisha was different from the Zisha when she first entered the formation. The previous Zisha's destructive power was not so great. But now, this Zisha destroyed everything it saw. Aemo had no doubt that even if a big iron lump was involved, it would also be destroyed by this Zisha. He was directly reduced to ashes. She didn't turn into ashes. At the very least, she was still whole. Even her clothes weren't torn. But she felt pain. He felt a burning pain all over his body. More importantly, she felt a repulsive force in it. Everything else was involuntarily flying inwards, but she felt her body being forcefully pushed outwards, as if it wanted to send her back to the outside world. The fierce wind blew around her, but she used all her strength to move forward into the depths of the black hole. She wanted to go in and take a look. She must go in and take a look. Shenjuli, if you don't come out, I'll come in. I want to see what you're up to. Even if you're dead, I still have to find your corpse. If he was alive, he wanted to see the person. If he was dead, he wanted to see the corpse. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hugging this stuffy gourd. I don't want to wait 1,000 years just to see if you're dead or alive. I want to know if you're alive or dead. She didn't know when the tears flowed out, but they were burned dry by the wind in an instant. Chapter 1749. She pursed her lips tightly, and no longer thought about who had wronged who in the past. There was only one thought in her mind. She wanted to see him, even if it meant seeing a corpse. She was like a boat going against the current in this purple smoke, and it was extremely difficult to move forward. It was dark in front of her, and she couldn't see anything clearly. It was as if she was leading to hell. If she was a little timid, she would have to desperately turn back, even if it was smooth sailing. Not to mention the difficulty of moving forward. Fortunately, her skills were not bad, and she had a kind of courage to fight. As long as she made up her mind, even if there was a mountain of knives and a sea of fire in front of her, she would rush forward without blinking. She didn't know how long she had been moving forward. Perhaps it wasn't very long. But in the heart of an impatient person, 1 second was like a century. Bang! She didn't know what she had bumped into, but she was a little dizzy and her forehead was almost bulging. Since she had followed the purple evil spirit to the depths of the underground, because the things that were wrapped in it had been melted by the purple evil spirit, she hadn't encountered anything other than the whistling wind around her. Now that she had suddenly bumped into this, she couldn't help but reach out to touch it. However, she touched something slippery. That thing squeaked when she touched it, giving her a fright. She was the Devil Master, so her skills were naturally not small. Even in the dark space, she could see things as if she was wearing night vision goggles. She glanced at that thing, and then she had goosebumps. It was a ghost with a physical body. Its physical body was not flesh, but condensed by dark purple gas. It was like water, and the cold air penetrated directly into people's bones. The ghost's mouth was tightly biting the thing in front of it, and it looked like it wouldn't let go even if it died. There were countless ghosts attached to the thing that was bitten, so people couldn't see the specific appearance of this thing. She could only faintly feel that this thing seemed to be slowly rolling forward. The ghosts squeaked, but they were unwilling to let go. Aemo smelled a familiar smell from that thing, and her heart beat wildly. She didn't care about anything else, and she grabbed a few ghosts and pulled with all her might. Finally, they were pulled away from the thing. Those ghosts were naturally unconvinced. They turned around and turned to bite her. Aemo narrowed her eyes. She was the devil master, and these ghosts still wanted to bite her? Amo's hand trembled, and a red light flashed, turning the spirits into nothingness. Because there were a few ghosts missing, Aemo squeezed him before the other ghosts rushed over to fill the gap. Then she finally saw him. The moment she saw him clearly, her head buzzed. His blood rushed to his head. He sat upright inside like a Buddha, his hands forming a seal. Drops of blood appeared on his fingertips, condensing into a line of blood that flew directly above his head. And there, the heavenly path sword was floating and spinning in circles, forming the shape of a lotus. It shone brightly, but this lotus was blood red, and it was the kind that bloomed and withered. As the saying goes, flowers bloom in an instant, flowers fall in an instant. Blood-red petals floated down from above and danced around his body, forming a flower canopy. It looked both strange and beautiful. Around the flower canopy, there were 8 strange-looking purple monsters. These monsters looked indescribably strange. Although they had noses and eyes, they were not where they should be. For example, some had noses above their eyes, and some had a claw sticking out of their mouths, holding an eyeball and turning it around. Chapter 1750. It was simply a replica of the alien monsters in the sci-fi horror movies she had seen in her previous life. Or rather, it was even more disgusting and surprising than those monsters. There were 8 of these monsters, and they surrounded the flower barrier in 8 directions. Their long fangs pierced the flower barrier, and they tore and bit the flower barrier crazily. Blood seeped out from Shinjuli's fluttering blue clothes, but he remained motionless like a mountain. His fingers moved even faster and faster. The 8 evils of chaos. Aemo didn't know why, but these 4 words flashed through her mind. Her eyes stared at Shinjuli's body. She knew that those petals were transformed from his divine blood, and the 8 monsters were actually gnawing on his flesh. His face was already as pale as a sheet of paper, but the expression on his face was cold and indifferent. It was just like what she had often seen, high and mighty, untainted by even a speck of dust. A true god, as if he was not going to die, but just an ordinary meditation. When she was still an ordinary person, she felt that Shinjuli was like a god in the 9 levels of heaven. He was immortal, emotionless and desireless. She wanted to tear him down from his pedestal. It turned out that he was really a god, and an ancient one at that, the only god in the world. But she was a demon, an ancient demon. Even she herself couldn't remember the origin of the demon. She was a demon, but she was different from ordinary demons. She was the only demon in the world who could go against him. To think that 2 completely unrelated people would actually have such a deep relationship and actually fall in love with each other. This was truly a miracle. Aemo looked at him from the outside. Just by looking at him like this, her restless heart strangely calmed down. Her eyes fell on the monsters, the 8 evils of chaos, formed by countless evil thoughts and resentment when heaven and earth were first formed. They liked to eat demon blood and were immortal. They could be sealed with demon blood. When they sensed that heaven and earth were not in harmony, they would come into being and control the purple evil to destroy heaven and earth. They could eat everything in the world. When the purple evil appeared, heaven and earth would end. Aemo clutched the lotus-like enchantment tightly and stared at him, who was meditating inside the enchantment. Inexplicable words emerged endlessly in her mind. She didn't know where these words came from. They seemed to have been engraved in her mind a long time ago, but they had been sealed away by the vicissitudes of time, and now floated out again. If this was true, then she should be the one being devoured by the 8 evils of chaos. Not him. The lotus bud enchantment was moving slowly. Following the direction of the movement, she saw the open door. Was he sitting here waiting for the 8 vicious beasts to eat him clean, and then roll into this door to seal the 8 vicious beasts again? It turned out that this was Zisha's Tao of sealing. The Zisha was still desperately circling around the lotus bud, because of the dead souls on the lotus bud. Once the Zisha bit the lotus bud, it wouldn't be able to escape. After Shunjili sealed the 8 evil beasts in the lotus bud, he would use all his divine power to purify the Zisha outside. Imo placed his hand on the barrier of the lotus bud and finally said in a hoarse voice, "Shunjili, let me in." She said these words with her magic power, which could penetrate everything with or without substance. Shunjili, who was meditating inside, seemed to be shocked by an electric shock. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked in her direction. When he saw her pretty face close to the lotus bud, his face changed greatly. "You, what are you doing here? Get out. Let me in." Imo only said these words. Chapter 1751. This is not the place for you to come. Devil Master, this has nothing to do with you. Shinjuli's voice was harsh and urgent. "I will purify them. You will only be a hindrance if you come in. Get out. Get out now. I will say it again. Let me in." Imo stared straight at him and refused to give in. Shunjuli suddenly looked straight at her. There was no emotion in his eyes, only hatred and indifference. "Devil Master, are you always so confused? Or is it that you've rekindled your feelings for me and want to get me back? Don't you care about Lizine anymore? She and I are already married." His words were very vicious, and the hatred in his eyes was more like a thorny whip. Amo's eyes were dark, and her face was slightly pale. She still said the same thing. "Let me in." Shinjuli secretly took a breath. "Ningxuema, don't make trouble for me. To tell you the truth, after I seal this place, everything I owe you will be cleared. I will go back to the Tianxi continent and live the life I used to. There will be nothing between you and me. Nianma is your child. I have done you wrong, so I will resurrect him and return him to you. In this way, we will not owe each other anything. Why do you still want to be entangled?" Imo pursed her lips and turned a deaf ear to his harsh words. She only asked in a low voice, "You don't want me to go in, do you?" She occupied the position that the ghosts should occupy. The wandering ghosts in the outer circle were naturally unwilling to give up. They circled around behind her and stretched their claws. The purple evil spirit gathered behind her was getting thicker and thicker. It was getting fiercer and fiercer. It was about to solidify. If she did not have a wizardry barrier to protect herself, she would have been devoured by these ferocious creatures at this time. The purple evil and the dead souls were extremely dangerous. Once she stayed with them for a long time, even if she had a protective wizardry barrier, it would bring irreversible damage to her. Shinjuli looked at her pale face and suddenly sneered. "Ningxuema, are you so shameless? If you know what's good for you, get out of here. I don't want to see you again." This was the harshest thing he had said to her since they met. Imo had been holding onto the lotus bud barrier with both hands, but now she slowly let go of it. She smiled gently. "Okay, I'll scram. Shinjuli, don't regret this." Her charming face was pale, and even her once captivating red lips had been pursed into a pale white. Shinjuli suddenly looked away and said coldly, "I have never regretted it. Get the hell out of here." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of light in her right palm and a dagger appeared. His heart suddenly sank. Before he could say anything, Imo had already cut open his left palm. Blood flowed out instantly. The surrounding purple demons seemed to have smelled the taste of the best delicacies and rushed to her palm one after another. Shinjuli's face changed dramatically. He knew that once the purple demons got into her body, she could only wait for death. At this moment, he had no time to think too much. He raised his sleeve, and the wizardry barrier in the direction where Imo was standing suddenly cracked open. Imo pressed one hand on the gap, and her body swayed. She directly entered the wizardry barrier. The lotus bud closed the moment she entered. Of course, there were some strange-looking ghosts that followed her in. They opened their mouths and attacked Imo desperately, trying to suck the blood flowing from her palm. Chapter 1752. A beam of white light shot out and hit those ghosts, causing them to be annihilated. You're crazy. Shinjuli was simply flustered and exasperated. Imo closed her eyes slightly. Yes, she was crazy. She had gone crazy the moment she met him so many years ago. He was so crazy that he couldn't control himself. The 8 chaotic evils in the enchantment seemed to have smelled a real delicacy. They let out a few ear-piercing screams and pounced on her. Sure enough, her flesh and blood was the real treasure to them. The god's flesh and blood was just a substitute. Imo pursed her lips and smiled. She did not know if she was laughing at this damned fate, or at her own inexplicable feelings. She raised her hand, and the sky splitter sword struck again, slashing at the first evil beast that attacked. Her sword was invincible. That day when Yi Tianli held it in his hand, she used his not-so-skillful swordsmanship to stab Shinjuli. Not to mention that she was personally attacking now. Its power was not to be underestimated. She thought that this sword could split this monster into two. Even if it did not split into two, it could at least cut a big hole in its body, right? She did not expect that when her sword stabbed into the monster's soft and slippery belly, it was like stabbing into oil. She did not feel anything at all. When she retracted her sword, there was not even a white mark left on the monster's body. This angered the monster. Its fangs grew 10 feet in the wind, and it stabbed at Imo. 3 of the other 7 monsters also gave up on Shinjuli. They also flashed their fangs and rushed towards her. Fast. Imo had never seen such a fast monster. Suddenly, something flashed in her mind. She curled her lips and smiled, but her eyes flashed with a hint of fierceness. The sky splitter sword in her hand suddenly struck out. A rain of blood suddenly flew around her body. The rain of blood turned into small crimson swords and shot towards the 4 monsters. There was an earth-shattering roar in the enchantment. The 4 monsters were turned into hedgehogs in the blink of an eye by these small crimson swords. They howled and fell. Before they fell to the ground, they turned into ashes and scattered. Shiwama. Stop. Shinjuli's voice sounded like it was going to split apart. His body swayed, and he finally managed to get around the monsters that were still surrounding him. He ran towards her. His running speed could not be said to be slow, but right now he had lost too much of his internal energy, so he was a bit slower than Imo. They watched as her figure flashed and dashed towards the other 4 evil beasts. Fresh blood burst out from her body once again as another round of blood swords shot out, nailing the remaining 4 evil beasts to the ground before turning them into ashes. In the blink of an eye, the 8 ferocious beasts disappeared without a trace. The lotus bud enchantment finally quieted down. Imo's entire body was bathed in blood, and his face was pale. He stood there swaying, but there was a smile on his lips. Shinjuli, if you want to completely destroy these evil beasts, you don't just have to offer the flesh and blood of the gods. There's also the blood of the demons' hearts. Shiwama. Shinjuli did not care that she was covered in blood, and directly hugged her. His voice was anxious and angry. Who told you to do this? His fingers trembled as he felt her pulse. She raised her hand and struggled to avoid him. She slightly closed her eyes. I think this way. We don't owe each other anything. She even struggled, as if she wanted to escape from his grasp. Shinjuli hugged her so tightly that it was as if she would disappear if he let go. Shiwama, let me see your injuries. His voice was very hoarse. Chapter 1753. His voice was extremely hoarse, and his fingers that were touching her wrist were extremely cold. The 2 moves she used just now were the unique skills of the Devil Clan, but they were also moves that could kill 1,000 enemies and hurt 800 of her own. The blood sword that burst out was condensed from her heart's blood and magic power, and its lethality was not ordinary. It was a move that could be used to perish together with the enemy when there was no other choice. This kind of move could only be learned by the Devil Clan, who had extremely high magic power. It was a bit similar to the demonic disintegration technique. Once used, it could certainly destroy the enemy, but it would also be used up along with the loss of heart's blood. Many years ago, there was once a devil king who was chased into a corner by his pursuers and was forced to use this move. He killed hundreds of immortal cultivators, and his soul was annihilated. Shenjuli never thought that Imo would use this move on the 8 evil beasts as soon as they came in. He wanted to stop it, but it was too late. At this moment, she was lying in his arms, gasping for breath. There was a trace of a stubborn smile on her lips, but her eyes were about to close. Shenjuli, this way we don't owe each other anything, she murmured. I want to save my face. If you don't want to be with me, just throw me out. Shenjuli's face was snow white, and his heart seemed to be torn apart in an instant. He hugged her, who was almost floating, and said, Shuama, I'm sorry. He didn't mean to hurt her, but he wanted to let her go. But he didn't want her to die here. The 8 chaotic beasts were the root of the purple evil. Usually they could only be sealed, but they couldn't be completely killed. There were only 2 ways to kill them. The first was to use the flesh and blood of God. God would use a special curse technique to cover his flesh and blood, turning it into blood lotus petals that would scatter in all directions. These evil beasts would eat these petals, and when they ate a certain amount of flesh and blood with the curse, the 8 evil beasts would explode and die. Of course, God would also cease to exist. At the last moment, God would use his last breath to turn into a heavy rain, completely purifying the remaining purple evil chi between heaven and earth. In the future, there would be no more purple evil chi, and the world would be peaceful again. As for the second method, it was a little more complicated. It required the gods and demons to work together. The gods would sacrifice their own flesh and blood, and wait for the 8 evil beasts to devour half of the god's blood, before using the demon heart sword technique to kill these evil beasts. And what Imo used just now was the heart sword technique. To use this technique, the first thing one had to do was to sever one's own heart meridian. Then, one had to use a special technique to expel the blood from the heart meridian out of the body and turn it into a blood sword. No demon king who used this move could survive. Right now, Imo's pretty face was deathly pale. Lying in his arms, she already looked like a lamp that had run out of oil. Shenjuli's face was pale. He hugged her tightly and called her name by her ear. This name had long been engraved in his bones. Shuama, Shuama, Shuama. At the same time, he pressed his palm on her back and channeled his psychokinesis into her body to connect her severed heart meridian. Imo struggled in his arms again and wanted to break free. I don't want to get you back. I just don't want to owe you anything. I want to use my own method to be even. Go back to the Tianxi continent and live your own life. Go find Zine. I don't want to take revenge. I don't want to take revenge. I just want you to not let her appear in front of me again. Tears seeped out from the corner of her eyes, gradually wetting her curly eyelashes. However, her little mouth stubbornly pursed. Chapter 1754. Although she was lying in his arms, her body was trying to stay away from him. She even tried to break away from his hand that was connecting her pulse. You don't want me anymore. Shenjuli, if you don't want me anymore, just stay away from me. Her tears and her words were like a knife, twisting and turning in Shenjuli's heart. He hugged her and hugged her to his chest. Shuama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said just now. How could I not want you? I've never given up on you. It's just, without Lizine, I would have dealt with her a long time ago. After I found out the truth, I dealt with her. Shuama, I only like you. I only love you. There has never been anyone else. Listen to me and let me heal you. Liar. Liar. You said that you were married to her. And you even blocked the lightning for her. Imo was half awake and half confused. Her little hand was holding his sleeve stiffly. Her fingertips were clearly touching his collar, but she refused to grab it. She felt wronged. You sent me flying because of her. And my stomach hurt. My stomach hurt so much at that time. But you didn't care about me. I was a jerk at that time. Shuama, I'm sorry. Shenjuli felt as if there was a lump in his throat, and he couldn't speak. Naturally, he knew that his slap that day had caused her indescribable harm, whether it was physical or mental. He explained to her as he transferred his telekinesis into her heart. Lizine and I weren't married. I blocked the lightning for her, because I owed her father a favor. So I had to help her pass the lightning tribulation. He tried to summarize the matter with Lizine, as he rubbed his face against her tear-stained face. Shuama, the person I've always liked is you. And I've never thought of marrying anyone else. Come, be good and let me connect your pulse. She seemed to have accepted his explanation. Her stiff body showed signs of softening, and she was no longer so against him healing her. He took the opportunity to channel his psychokinesis deeper. Shuama, be good. Follow my psychokinesis. I will cure you. She was already half asleep, as if she had sunk into those old nightmares. So many people wanted to kill me. No one cared when I had a high fever in the inn. No one cared when I cried. No one cared when I fainted in the bathtub to reduce my fever. No one cared when I almost drowned. The children were hungry and so was I. But I couldn't find anything to eat. Her tears flowed out again. Shun Julie's lips trembled as he lowered his head to kiss her gently. He hugged her even tighter. Shuama, it's all my fault. At this moment, she was no longer the cold and distant devil master. Instead, she was like a child who had been wronged. She unknowingly spilled out all the grievances of the past. Shen Julie connected her heart with one hand and held her in his arms with the other. From time to time, he would wipe away her tears with his lips. Her tears were salty and a little bitter. The temperature seemed to be able to directly burn his heart. Hearing his repeated apologies, she finally stopped resisting him. Her small hands unknowingly clung to his clothes tightly, as if she had finally found the support of her soul. She leaned her head against his chest and murmured, "Great God, I'm cold. Hug me. You haven't hugged me for a long time." Shinjuli could only hug her even tighter. Tears fell from the corners of his eyes, and his heart rose and fell like a tide. How long had it been since she called him Great God? How long had it been since she leaned on him like this? Chapter 1755. She was obviously in a daze. Almighty God, please don't abandon me again. I am afraid that you will abandon me. I am pregnant with your child. No, I can't use the child to threaten you. You want me because you like me, not because of the child. Shuemo. Shun Julie's lips touched the corner of her lips. How long had it been since he hugged her so intimately? His lips touched her lips that were a little dry because of excessive blood loss. His heart ached as if he was drowning. He never liked to explain himself. Shuema, I have always wanted you because I like you. Shuema, I am afraid that you will abandon me. Shuema, hang in there. Think about me and our Nyenma. He is still waiting for you to go back. As he spoke, he forcefully infused her with his psychokinesis to keep her alive. He could not let her die. If she died, then what was the point of all the sacrifices that he had made? What was the point of him saving the world? It was only because she was in this world that he wanted the world to be safe and sound. She also wanted to be safe and sound. His psychokinesis surged into her body and forcibly connected her heart. However, without her cooperation, the heart meridian would not heal on its own under the support of his psychokinesis. She did not know if it was because of his last sentence, or because the blood in her heart was flowing again. Her brain finally woke up from the half-drowsy state. She struggled to open her eyes to look at him. Her pair of eyes were misty and dark, as if they had been washed by water. From the initial confusion, they gradually became clear. It was as if she had finally struggled out of the nightmare of the past. Looking at his pale face, she said, "You." She wanted to push him away, but she could not bear to. She had been longing for this embrace for too long. Now she was finally here, and he was hugging her so tightly. It was like many years ago, before the two of them had broken up. Although he did not confess his feelings, he often liked to hug her. She also liked to nestle in his arms. In his arms, she felt like a drifting boat that had finally found a harbor. It was a warm and peaceful feeling. He was the only one who could give her this feeling. No one else could. She wanted to push him away, but she couldn't help but lean against him and stare at him. "What you said just now, was it true? You didn't lie to me when I was about to die." She lowered her eyes again. "You've always liked to lie to me. You even erased my memories." Shunjuli. It seemed that not only had all her memories of Ning Shuamo returned, but even the memories that had been erased had also returned. No wonder she didn't believe him. Although she was still skeptical of him, she was like a little kitten curled up in his embrace. Her little mouth was still proudly pursed, but her little hand was unknowingly grabbing onto his lapel. He was like a child who was afraid of being abandoned. He stubbornly expressed that he was not afraid of being abandoned, because he was already used to being abandoned. However, he still yearned to be taken in, and didn't want to be abandoned. She probably didn't realize how contradictory her actions and expression were. Her expression made his heart ache, but he couldn't help but laugh. Just as the corner of his lips rose, it was filled with sorrow. This was his treasure. He had always wanted to hold the treasure in his hands. He didn't know when he had accidentally lost it. Now he finally found it again. Chapter 1756. He lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. It's true. It's truer than real gold. Shuama, I've wronged you. I've done a lot of wrong things, and caused you to suffer a lot. Can you forgive me? His cool lips kissed her forehead, but she felt a scorching heat. That scorching heat flowed down her forehead and into her lungs, making her lungs feel warm as well. Her heart didn't hurt as much anymore. You told me to get lost and said you didn't want to see me. She pouted. I'm wrong. He kissed her again. You said I was muddle-headed, and that we didn't know each other anything. She wanted to settle the score. Yes, I was muddle-headed. I was wrong. Shinjuli kissed her again. His kiss and words warmed her heart. She wiped her eyes, but she couldn't hold back her tears. Her tears burned him. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead, her eyebrows, and her eyes. He kissed away her tears. Shuama, don't cry. I've wronged you. I'll let you hit me and punish me, okay? He wanted to say this for a long time, but he didn't have the chance. Now he finally said it. It turned out that the Almighty Great God also knew how to say sweet nothings. Although this was something any man could say, when it came from his mouth, the unfairness and grievances in Amo's heart finally subsided. She was still very reasonable. She also remembered some of her own things. I'm also in the wrong. I also hurt you. Recalling her coldness and behavior towards him in Emo Palace, her heart ached. She raised her hand and touched his back. Your injury. He grabbed her hand and held it. I'm fine. That injury has already healed. The two of them held each other's hands and felt each other's warmth. Imo arched into his arms. I threw your flowers and hurt you. It's okay. Those flowers were originally for you. It doesn't matter what you do with them. I've hurt you so many times. It's only right that you hurt me, not to mention that it's just a superficial injury. As Shunjuli spoke, he channeled his telekinesis into her. He could feel that her mood was gradually stabilizing, which was a good sign. I even destroyed your flower bed. Imo began to reflect seriously. Shunjuli's eyes dimmed slightly, but he quickly smiled. Shuama, let's not talk about this anymore. It is more important to heal you. Do you still want to see little Nianma? Of course he wanted to. Thinking of his son, who was like a pink dumpling, Amo's spirits were slightly lifted. That's right, she couldn't die. She still had a son. If she died like this, little Nianma would be very sad. She had yet to play with him as his biological mother. Her desire to live increased greatly, and her eyes shone slightly. Seeing her bright eyes, Shunjuli knew it was time. Come, Shuama, follow my telekinesis. You can use. He recited the incantation to connect her heart and veins. She blinked her eyes and agreed without hesitation. Okay. She wanted to live. Her son was waiting for her, and Shunjuli was also waiting for her. She stared at his face. His face was too pale, and she was a little worried. How are you? She did not forget that when she first came in, the evil beasts were already half full. In other words, at least more than half of his divine power was lost. I'm fine. Shunjuli kissed her eyes and slowly moved his hand to her chest. Shuama, you can't delay any longer. I have to start now. In order to connect her heart and veins, she must actively cooperate. Chapter 1757. Imo tried her best to ignore the awkwardness of his palm pressing on half of her breasts. She closed her eyes and began to sense his power. She also mobilized her remaining power to cooperate with him. Just now, when she had rushed into the black hole in a moment of hot-headedness, she was actually prepared to die. When her memory was restored, she could hate him and blame him. Even if they were strangers for the rest of their lives, she would not mind. However, she realized that she could not face his death. The moment she realized that he did not come up, she felt as if the sky had collapsed. On the way to the ceiling point, the scene of him desperately trying to save her kept flashing in front of her eyes. His embrace, and his farewell, his hesitation, his patience, and his paleness. Everything about him turned over in her heart. Sometimes, whether a person was good to another person or not was not determined by his words, but by his actions. When everything followed instinct, one could tell whether a person cared about another person or not. At that time, in the milky white wizardry barrier, he could not hide his nervousness for her. Although he later said that everything was for the sake of the big picture, if she thought about it carefully, his words and actions were obviously insincere. Some things needed to be sensed by heart, not just by listening to him. He obviously cared about her very much. Amo's mind was sharp. Subconsciously, she actually understood it. However, because of the past, she did not want to forgive him for the time being. Not forgiving him did not mean that she wanted to see him die. Therefore, she rushed down directly. If he disappeared in the black hole, she would not be able to get out. In the wizardry barrier, she used the mind sword technique because she knew that this method could kill the 8 evil beasts. Secondly, she also had the idea that they would live and die together. She would rather die first than watch helplessly as he was eaten to death by the evil beasts. Now that he was not dead, and she had the hope of surviving, she naturally wanted to live. Otherwise, little Nienma would be an orphan. He was still so young. After all, he was only a few months old. His unreliable parents had already made him so sensible. If she died like this, she would feel sorry for her child. Thinking of this, her desire to live became stronger. She tried her best to cooperate with Shunjuli's telekinesis. The two of them were used to cooperating, so they were not unfamiliar with each other at this time. He could actually conjure up a bed and let her lie on it while he treated her. But she didn't know if it was because his skills weren't up to par or because he didn't want to put her down. But he kept her in his arms. His blue robe was wide and her body was petite and exquisite. Lying in his arms, she almost sank into it. One of her arms was still wrapped around his waist, and she felt very comfortable lying in his arms. Every girl liked to be protected by the person she loved, and to have a pair of strong arms to lean on when she was tired. Ayamo was no exception. Shunjuli was the only person she wanted to rely on. No one else was good enough for her. The misunderstanding between them hadn't been completely resolved yet, and Ayamo wasn't someone who would believe everything someone said. Under normal circumstances, if Shunjuli explained it to her, she would certainly not believe it. At most she would be skeptical. In reality, there were many husbands who had an affair and were caught in bed by their wives. Even if he swore that they were just chatting under the quilt, it was naturally not credible. Chapter 1758. There were too many misunderstandings and worries between her and Shunjuli. In fact, it was not something that could be explained with just a few words. Moreover, in order to not make her hate him, and to restore their relationship as soon as possible, he even erased her memory once with such a bad record. It would be difficult for her to believe him with just a few words. But she would rather believe him now. As long as he explained, she would believe him. After all, she understood his character and personality. Subconsciously, she was willing to believe him. Subconsciously, she was also looking for a way out for her feelings. Connecting her heart was actually very painful. It was not much worse than when her heart was in pain, but she felt that it was bearable. Sweat dripped from her forehead. She pursed her lips and did not say a word. Is it very painful? Shunjuli looked at her in his arms. If it's painful, just scream. I won't laugh at you. He reached out a hand and put it beside her lips. How about I let you bite it? Ayamo remembered the scene when he treated her heart before she was sealed. It clearly happened not long ago, but now that she thought about it, it felt like it was a lifetime ago. Her gaze fell on his fingers. There were still 2 rows of clear teeth marks left by her. How was he letting her bite it? He was clearly letting her see the evidence of his crime. Ayamo glanced at him. Why didn't you remove the marks on it? Such a small injury was just a matter of wiping it away. But he let it be so obvious. Shunjuli looked down at her and smiled. This is a memento that you left for me. Of course, I have to keep it. Then should I make this more memorable? Imo picked up his hand and put it in her mouth, pretending to bite it. Her small mouth was soft. When the tip of her tongue touched the skin of his palm, he felt a burst of numbness spread from his palm to his heart. How was this biting? She was clearly teasing him. In addition, one of his palms was still pressing down on a certain key part of her body. Moreover, the woman in his arms was the woman he had loved for 3 lifetimes. It had been a long, long time since he had hugged her like this. It had been a long, long time since he had been so close to her. No matter how much of a gentleman he was, he still had a strange feeling in his heart. His eyes darkened, and his originally pale face turned red. Something surged in his chest, as if it was about to surge up to his throat. He was shocked and quickly suppressed it. He secretly took a deep breath and kissed her forehead. Be good. He was still treating her. Although her heart meridian had been connected, it was still not firm. He still needed to use his psychokinesis to comb it over and over again. He still could not be too distracted. Under normal circumstances, this kind of treatment would be nothing to him. But now, although she didn't need Amo's help anymore, the pain she felt from being combed over and over again wasn't fake. In the arms of her lover, she was especially weak. She hugged his arm and sounded a little aggrieved. It hurts, Shinjuli apologized. It was necessary to feel pain when he combed her heart meridian. It would be wrong if it didn't hurt. If she felt pain, it meant that her heart meridian had been successfully connected. However, looking at the sweat on her forehead, he couldn't bear it. But there was nothing he could do. Bear with it a little. It'll be fine soon. Kiss me. Kiss me and it won't hurt anymore. Although she was sweating from the pain, she was in a good mood and looked at him with watery eyes. Sick people were the most important. She liked it when he kissed her. Before he lost his memories, she had snuggled up in his arms more than once and acted coquettishly. Chapter 1759. When he was being pestered by that little girl, she even took the initiative to climb into his bed and nestle beside him. She could be brave in front of anyone. She could be invincible in front of anyone. She could be lofty in front of anyone. Only in front of him, she could completely let go of herself, just like a child. Facing her watery eyes, he naturally could not reject her. He lowered his head and kissed her face again, just like the wings of a butterfly, brushing past her cheeks. His breath was slightly cold, with a faint unique fragrance. When it touched her face, it made her heart feel like it was being brushed by a spring breeze. She closed her eyes in satisfaction, as if the pain had really lessened a lot. She did not want to take the initiative to kiss him yet. That would have to wait until she had completely forgiven him. Now she would treat it as giving him a little sweetness, and also giving herself a little sweetness. Although she was still sweating from the pain, the corners of her lips could not help but curl up like a bean pod. Shinjuli looked at her calm and beautiful face, and there seemed to be a flash of pain in his eyes. He could not bear to. He really could not bear to part with her. How good would it be if time stopped here? He wished that he could cast a spell to stop time, and stop it at this moment. At this moment, there was only him and her here, hugging each other. He wanted to dream of such a moment even in his dreams. But he could not. His skills were not good enough now, so he could not stop time, and he could not stay with her for a long time. Since he already knew the result, he should not have provoked her again. He should not have let her have any hope. He should have treated her coldly, and let her hate him to the core. Not like now, when he gave her hope, but it could only be a mirage for a moment. This kind of behavior of giving people hope, and then destroying it was the most cruel. He knew this clearly, but he still could not control himself when he saw her using that kind of self-destructive skill. He only wanted to be good to her, to not let her cry, to not let her feel pain, to really hug her, to kiss her properly. At this moment, they were still in the lotus bud. The remaining purple fiends outside were still biting on the bud. The door to hell was still half open, waiting for the bud to enter. Although the 8 ferocious beasts that produced the purple fiend had completely disappeared, the amount of purple fiend that flowed back out was too much. He had to use his divine power to purify it, or else they would recuperate for a few hundred years. and breed new 8 ferocious beasts. The new 8 ferocious beasts that appeared had no natural enemies. Even if he and Amo worked together, they would not be able to seal them again. Therefore, he still had to do what he had to do. What's more, he had already planned everything in detail. Some of the necessary steps had already been taken. Even if he regretted it now, there was no turning back. The gears of fate had already reached the final juncture, and even he could not restart it. Imo was too tired. She was really too tired today. First, she accompanied the children to play. Then she went to explore the big array. She even got injured. After a short rest, she followed the large group and went through all the difficulties along the way. She did not know how many battles she had to go through to reach the seal. In the middle, she even had a heart attack and almost lost her life. It was not easy to seal the big array. She was ejected into the sky, but found that Shinjuli did not come up. Then, she desperately rushed back down. It took her a lot of energy to rush back like a boat against the current. In order to enter the lotus bud, she cut herself. After entering, she even used the forbidden technique to kill the 8 ferocious beasts. Chapter 1760. Thinking of this, she had almost no time to rest. She had almost lost her life twice. Especially the last forbidden technique, which had consumed most of her magic power and more than half of her physical strength. At this moment, lying in the arms of her lover, she could not hold on any longer. Her upper and lower eyelids kept fighting. If it wasn't for the pain in her heart, she would have really fallen asleep. Shuama, are you sleepy? You should take a nap. Shinjuli had finally smoothed out her heart pulse. She could not withstand too much stimulation at the moment. Otherwise, her heart pulse would be broken. She had to rest for a while. If he could, he would force her to rest for a few days and stay by her side all the time. But now he could not. He could only stay by her side for an hour at most. Imo was indeed sleepy. She hugged one of his arms and said, "Almighty, I am asleep. You won't leave me alone, right?" She forced her eyes open and looked around. "Why don't we go out and rest? This is not a good place to rest." She wanted to get up in his arms. Shinjuli held her down. "Be good. You can't move now. You have to rest for an hour." In this world, he was probably the only one who could say be good to her. It was as if he was coaxing a child. If someone else said that to her, she would laugh and then slap the person away. Then, she would step on the person to make them behave. But now, when she heard him say that, she felt very happy. She was really hopeless. Hopelessly in love with someone. Hopelessly wanting to accept everything about that person. She raised her hand and rubbed her eyebrows. Then she looked around. Except for the wizardry barrier, everything outside was purple. The purple evil spirit had swallowed the entire wizardry barrier. Now, she felt as if she was in the purple evil spirit's stomach. The earth-shattering collapsing noises outside had already stopped. Presumably, the huge black hole had already been filled up, and he and she were most likely trapped under the mountain. She wondered if little Nianma would be like the agarwood on the treasure lotus lamp when he grew up, and would try to save his mother if they could not get out of this place. She couldn't help but smile again, and even her eyelashes curved. Although Shinjuli was full of worries, seeing her like this, he was in a good mood. He raised his hand and pinched her cheek. "What are you laughing at?" "I miss Mo. Back then you actually raised him in a rock. He practically popped out from a crack in the rock. He's already comparable to the Monkey King. I wonder if this brat will have the ability to wreak havoc in the heavens like the Monkey King when he grows up." How could her thoughts be so scattered at such a time? Shinjuli couldn't help but laugh. "He does have that ability. I'm much more capable than Sun Wukong's master. Naturally, my disciple won't be bad." He looked down and brushed her neat bangs again, teasing. "You are the best proof. Not everyone can train a good-for-nothing into a genius. Tisk, I'm not trash. At that time, I was an unpolished jade wrapped in the jade annulus of He clan. You have found a treasure by taking me as your disciple." Imo picked up one of his hands and fiercely bit it. Of course, it looked like the bite was heavy, but the bite was light. Only 2 rows of shallow teeth marks were left. "Well, you have indeed found a treasure. That's why I have a good eye. I can see through your useless appearance and see the genius inside. Shunjuli flicked her little mouth with his finger. Chapter 1761. The two of them were teasing each other, and everything was so natural. It was as if before they broke up, this was how they got along with each other, snuggling up to each other. It turned out that even a normal conversation could be so warm. For this moment, both of them didn't know how long they had been waiting for. She remained in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. Occasionally, she would play with his fingers and squint her eyes slightly, like a cat under the sun, enjoying his caress. The darkness that once blocked her heart seemed to disappear bit by bit, as they leaned against each other. In the depths of her heart, which had always been bleak, there was a little bit of sunlight penetrating. In fact, there were still some questions and grievances hidden in her heart, but she didn't want to ask or mention it at this time, so as not to break this rare peace. Supreme Divinity, you. She didn't know what to think, but she used the honorific again. What are you calling me? Shunjuli narrowed his eyes slightly. Anyone could call him Supreme Divinity, but she couldn't. If she called him that, his heart would hurt. Imo hugged his waist to comfort him, but still asked the biggest question in her heart. Almighty, have you recovered your memories from 50,000 years ago? Did we really have an earth-shattering fight? Who won in the end? Ever since she met him, this guy was high above and inviolable. Even when he was young in Mo Palace, his temperament was not to be underestimated. Although he never fought with her, she knew in her heart that if they really fought with all their strength, she was afraid that she wouldn't be his opponent. Maybe the her from 50,000 years ago could? If she recovered her memories from 50,000 years ago, would she also recover her skills from that time? How powerful was her skills at that time? Originally, she wasn't curious about her from 50,000 years ago, but now she was a little curious. Shunjuli's eyes deepened slightly, and he raised his hand to ruffle her hair. We are evenly matched. These few words were so perfunctory. Imo didn't give up. Then who's the stronger one? Shuama is the stronger one. Shunjuli answered without hesitation. He had been defeated by her for 3 lives, so naturally, she was the stronger one. Imo looked at him. Why did she feel that he was coaxing her? Then what was my name then? Imo settled for the next best thing. She only had the concept of Imo from 50,000 years ago. She felt that it was impossible for a dignified devil master like her to have such a casual name. Shuama, Shunjuli answered. Huh. Imo didn't react for a moment. You were called Shuama at that time. She was wearing a dress that was as red as blood. She was also a demon, so she named herself Shuama. So Shuama is my real name. Imo rubbed his forehead. But why do I only remember calling myself Imo? Shunjuli chuckled. Imo is the name you use when you want to do something bad. You want to create a sense of mystery. Imo raised an eyebrow at him. Why did she feel like he was trying to trick her? Alas, it seemed that she wouldn't be able to get much information from him. If she wanted to completely understand herself from tens of thousands of years ago, she had to recover her memories from tens of thousands of years ago. Because she had sealed her memories with a spell, she had forgotten whether she had memories from tens of thousands of years ago when she was reborn. If she wanted to solve this question, she had to undo her self-seal. Strange. This purple evil spirit only allowed her to recover her memories from her life as Ning Shuema. But it didn't allow her to recover her memories from the past. Chapter 1762. Should he unlock the seal and look at the memory from more than 50,000 years ago? It would take 2/3 of the time. It seemed that it was not worth it just to look at the memory. Amo's recovery speed was faster than Shunjuli expected. After only a little more than 15 minutes, her pale face had a hint of redness. When she spoke, she was getting stronger. At this speed, perhaps after half an hour, she would be able to escape without his help. However, in the current situation, would she escape alone? When the misunderstanding was not resolved, she was willing to follow him. Now that the misunderstanding was resolved, if she knew the truth, she would not leave. There was a high chance that he would die with him. If he was selfish, he would want her to accompany him even if he died. No matter where he went, he wanted her to accompany him. If possible, he would tie her to him. However, he could not. All the sacrifices he had made were for the sake of letting her live a good life. A life that was free and at ease. Otherwise, why would he do all this? Moreover, they had a little Nianma. Nianma was still so young. He could not let him lose his parents. Otherwise, the little boy would cry to death. Thinking of his son's terrible crying skill, Shunjuli felt a little troubled. He looked at her in his arms. She was probably really tired. After talking for a while, she was so sleepy that her eyelids were drooping. However, she still tried to stay awake and chatted with him. Her little hand was holding his big hand. Their fingers were intertwined. She was holding his hand tightly. If his hand moved slightly, she would be aware. She was now the devil master. Her sixth sense was very sharp. He was now an arrow at the end of its flight. He was afraid that he would not be able to plot against her. When he let her in and treated her well, he already had the idea of erasing her memory again. He wanted to completely erase this part of her memory, and erase the memory of her previous life. Then when he really disappeared, she would not be in pain. She would not be in so much pain that she wanted to die. She would be able to live happily again. If he succeeded, she would fall asleep. He would take advantage of the time when she was unconscious to send her out of this dark underground and back to the surface. He believed that there would be someone waiting for her on the ground. When she woke up, this memory would disappear. She would only remember that she had sealed Zisha. At most, she would remember the promise of 1,000 years between them. Time was the best medicine to heal all wounds. Even if he did not return after 1,000 years, she could still accept it. Moreover, what he wanted her to remember was the hatred that could not be quelled. She kept talking to him, as if she wanted to say all the things she had been holding back for so long. He was also talkative, and made all kinds of jokes with her. He kept hugging her very, very tightly, but he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. The most he did was kiss her forehead, the tip of her nose, her eyelashes. He never dared to touch her lips again. Shuema, are you sleepy? If you're sleepy, lean on me and rest. You'll recover faster if you sleep. He smiled and coaxed her. Shuema put her arms around his neck and looked into his eyes. Almighty, why don't you kiss me? Shunjuli was a little stiff. He sighed softly. You can't be too stimulated now. Before he finished his words, he was covered by her cold lips. This was the first time that she took the initiative to kiss him since they met. Chapter 1763. Shunjuli's body stiffened. His heart was beating like a drum. He wanted to push her away. Shuemayu. It won't be too exciting if I take the initiative. Almighty, kiss me. She whispered beside his lips. Then, her small mouth kissed him again. She used the tip of her tongue to push his lips open. She hugged and kissed him like a female overlord. There was a faint taste of blood in his mouth. It was the taste of blood that he couldn't swallow in time. She didn't feel it, and only focused on kissing him. She used the tip of her tongue to pry open his teeth, and danced with his tongue against his. It was a typical French kiss. She was the one who took the lead. She kissed him passionately and crazily, as if she could warm his cold lips and restore his vitality. After the kiss, she buried her head in his chest and panted slightly. Shuema. He called her with a trembling voice, as if he had sensed something. Her little face was buried in his chest, and he could feel the wetness slowly spreading from there. Was she crying? He raised his hand and wanted to do something, but he stopped when he felt the wetness. Idiot, why are you crying? He forced a smile. I'm happy. Her face was still on his chest, and her voice was a little muffled. Shunjuli let out a sigh of relief. He couldn't delay any longer. He raised his hand, her hand groped over, and held his hand tightly. Then she pulled it in front of her. Almighty, I'm sleepy. Let me hold your hand and sleep. Okay, he replied and let her hold his hand. How could he not like the feeling of their fingers intertwined? This was also the last time he would hold her hand. Naturally, he wanted to hold her hand for as long as possible. She was probably really tired. She fell asleep very quickly. However, her sleeping posture clearly showed that she didn't feel safe. Not only was she holding his hand with one hand, but her other hand was also holding his clothes tightly. He looked at her and stared at her without blinking. It was as if he wanted to engrave her appearance in his mind. A moment later, he closed his eyes slightly and raised his other hand, gently hovering above her head. A faint white light emitted and enveloped her. Shuama, I'm sorry. Forgive me for erasing your memories again. Forget about me, forget about this, then you can live a better life. You have to be happy, and I have to be happy as well. While he was casting the spell, she had been sleeping peacefully. He didn't know what kind of sad dream she had, but tears started to seep out of the corners of her eyes and rolled down one by one. Shinjuli wiped her tears with his trembling hands. This was the last time he would wipe her tears for her. There would never be a next time. In the future, no matter how much she cried, he would not be able to control her anymore. When mortals died, they would still have an afterlife to look forward to. However, he was a god. His death would truly cause his soul to scatter. He would truly disappear from this world and cease to exist. Shuama, live on. Take our son and live a good life. His hand that was wiping away her tears gradually became transparent, and the talisman on his blue robe also began to flicker. He watched as his hand began to disappear inch by inch. It began to turn into a small stream of flowing light. Once this sign began, it would be very fast. His body was like an ice crystal, cracking and disappearing. After a moment, Shinjuli's figure had already disappeared. The lotus bud suddenly broke and mixed with the flowing light that was originally rotating in the bud. This flowing light lifted Shuama up like a lover's embrace, enveloping her and flying out. Chapter 1764. Her tears fell drop by drop, but she never opened her eyes. She just slept peacefully and slept. Shuailan was wandering around outside like a madman. He was still looking for a passage to enter. Shinjuli was Shuama's obsession, and she was his obsession. He wouldn't give up until he saw her come out or her corpse. Because the seal was successful, most of the people in the 6 realms left. There were also a few loyal subordinates of Mo Palace who didn't leave. They were with Shuailan, and were searching around the mountain. Suddenly, a faint light flashed from the side of the mountain. Shuama's figure appeared out of thin air. A stream of light supported her, as she made a small circle outside the mountain. Then she landed on top of a mountain rock. Momo, Devil Master. Everyone saw her from different directions and rushed over. Shuailan ran at the front and rushed to her. When he saw her open her eyes, he stopped and said in a trembling voice, Momo. She was crying. Tears rolled down her cheeks like beads from a broken necklace. She slowly stood up and watched the stream of light that lifted her up circle around her 3 times before it spun away and flew into the clouds. A heavy rain fell. The heavy rain was like a heavenly river pouring down. Rushing downwards, Shuama knelt down in the rain without saying a word. Her hands dug into the grass beneath her. The rain washed her face. It was as if his hands were helping her wipe her tears again. The rain seemed to carry the cold fragrance of his sleeves. The sound of the rain seemed to be his reminders, reminding her to live well, to live on. Shinjuli, we promised each other. 1,000 years. I'll wait for you for 1,000 years. I'll wait for you to come back. I'll take our son and wait for you to come back. As long as you come back, I won't hold it against you for wiping my memories again. Only when you come back can I be happy. Only then can my son and I be happy. Yes, her memories hadn't been wiped away. She was the Devil Master. Even when she was at her weakest, her senses were far sharper than normal people. When she was in his arms, she had already sensed that his body temperature was abnormal. His body temperature was dropping lower and lower. However, in order to not let her sense it, he was still desperately using spells to recover that little bit of body temperature. His heartbeat also slowed down, and then it stopped. That was the true 5 decay of heaven and man. No one could reverse the situation, not even her. At that time, she couldn't do anything for him. The only thing she could do was to not let him worry about her. She knew that he was worried about her. She knew that he wanted to wipe away her memories, so that she could be happy. Thus, she fell asleep according to his wishes, giving him the opportunity to perform the final memory erasing technique on her. She didn't want him to leave, so she didn't open her eyes. But she couldn't control her tears. She didn't want him to, she wanted Momo. She was the devil master. As long as she was unwilling, no one could truly erase her memories. Shui Ilan stood beside her in a daze, looking at her crying. From beginning to end, she didn't make a sound, but her tears kept flowing down her face. Along with the continuous rain, it was as if the world was also crying with her. This kind of silent crying was the most heart-wrenching. The rain fell for 3 days and 3 nights. She knelt in the rain and cried for 3 days and 3 nights. No one could persuade her, and no one could really get close to her. They could only watch her cry. Chapter 1765. 3 days later, the rain finally stopped. A rainbow rose from the horizon, and the green hills were washed clean. The heavy rain washed away all the dirt of the mortal world and purified all the remaining purple evil in the world, leaving nothing behind. Shuema slowly stood up. Her knees seemed to be numb from kneeling, and she swayed as soon as she stood up. Momo, Shui Ilan, who had been accompanying her in the rain, rushed over and wanted to support her. However, she stepped back a few steps like flowing water, and Shui Ilan missed. He stood in place and looked up at her. Momo. There were no more tears on her face, as if she had cried all the tears in her life in the past 3 days. Her small face was plain and clean, but her eyes were clear as if they had been washed by water. It was a pair of ink-black eyes, and they were no longer red like gemstones. Standing there like this, she didn't look like the former Devil Lord, but like Ning Shuema in the past. This kind of her made Shui Ilan feel a little strange, especially the expression on her face. He stood there and didn't dare to go forward. He paused for a moment before asking, Momo, where is he? He also saw the flowing light that carried her up 3 days ago. He was a demon emperor, and he was experienced and knowledgeable, so he vaguely guessed something. He only asked this to confirm it from her mouth. Shuema didn't answer. She turned to look at the surrounding mountains and rivers. Divine power could create all things. Every blade of grass, every tree, every rock, and every mountain should have his breath. Tears wanted to come out again, but she held them back. He was gone, and there was no one to wipe her tears for her. She wouldn't cry again unless he came back. I will wait for him. Shuema smiled, but there seemed to be tears in her smile, but there was also an unshakable determination. It was only 1,000 years. She could afford to wait. Shui Ilan's heart finally sank. He turned to look at the surrounding scenery, as if trying to find that person from these sceneries. Although he knew that it would be cruel to ask, he still asked, what if he still doesn't come after 1,000 years? Then we'll wait for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 5,000 years, until he returns. He can't bear to part with me. She looked up at the rainbow in the sky and smiled. Shenjuli, I know you can't bear to part with me, so you must come back. Shuema left with those loyal demon generals. When she left, her gaze finally turned to Shui Ilan. Then she smiled and said, Shui Ilan, I can treat you as a friend, a true friend. Her smile was pure, but her eyes were calm. When she looked at him, it was as if she was looking at a friend. Shui Ilan's heart ached, but he also smiled and only replied with one word. Okay. He stood where he was and watched her figure slowly disappear into the air, but he no longer had the courage to chase after her. He knew that no matter how long he chased after her, he would never be able to catch up to her. She only had that person in her eyes. At most, he could only be considered as her friend. He could only be her friend. He stood there for a long time, not moving for a while. After a while, he smiled and said, Shinjuli, although you are dead, this king is still very envious of you. He looked up at the sky and couldn't help laughing. So I even envied a dead person. His laughter sounded like he was crying. His laughter echoed in the valley, startling countless birds. Suddenly, he seemed to sense something and suddenly turned around. His gaze fell on a woman, who had just come out from behind a rock not far away. Chapter 1766. The woman was wearing a light red dress, looking elegant and refined. She calmly looked at him and calmly said, Do you want to have a drink? This woman was Fairy Ice Jade, who had worked with him before. He never thought that she would not go back with the other deities, and would instead be waiting here. Shui Ilan's subordinates had already been sent away by him, so he was the only one here. Seeing Fairy Ice Jade suddenly appear, he felt a bit unhappy. Was this woman here just to see him make a fool of himself? His lips curled into a smile that could topple cities, but the words he said were vicious. Fairy, are you waiting here just to seduce this king? Fairy Ice Jade froze and raised her brows to look at him. What did you say? Shui Ilan slowly walked over and looked down at her. You willingly waited here in the heavy rain and appeared when this king was in dire straits. Is it because you think this king will be grateful to you and agreed to drink with you? Fairy Ice Jade's face turned slightly pale. I just want to drink with your excellency. Shui Ilan's smile became even more enchanting. Then what happens after we drink? He slightly moved closer to her. This king has heard of a phrase called messy sex after drinking. Do you want to have messy sex after drinking with this king? These words could be considered an insult. Fairy Ice Jade's face turned pale. You! She raised her hand to push his handsome face away. Shui Ilan grabbed her hand and moved closer to her. He said in a soft voice, It's a pity that this king is not interested in you. Suddenly throwing her away, Fairy Ice Jade was thrown back a few steps. When she finally stood up, her face turned red. Shui Ilan! Shui Ilan's figure floated and suddenly moved in front of her. Raising his hand, he grabbed her chin and looked into her eyes. Who do you think you are? Is the name Shui Ilan something you can say? Ice Jade Fairy's pretty face turned green and white. Suddenly, a faint purple light flashed on her body. Shui Ilan's finger trembled, as if it was shocked by electricity. His finger loosened, but Ice Jade Fairy had already retreated a few steps like flowing water. Your Excellency thinks too much. Bingyu doesn't have any thoughts about Your Excellency. However, on account of our previous cooperation, I would like to invite Your Excellency for a drink. Since Your Excellency has no such intentions, Bingyu will not force Your Excellency. Goodbye. She turned around and flew away. Shui Ilan stared blankly for a moment. Looking at his own hand, he seemed to have underestimated this woman. Her kung fu was much higher than what he had seen in the sealed land. She had hidden her true strength. Where did this woman come from? This thought flashed through his mind for a moment before he tossed it aside. No matter where that woman came from, it had nothing to do with him. As long as she didn't get in the way of him and Momo, he wouldn't care about her. He stood there for a moment and sighed softly. He really wanted to find someone to have a drink with. Shuemo returned to Emo Palace first. She went straight to the small courtyard where Shinjuli used to live to see the flower. Then, she stood at the entrance of the courtyard in a daze. The heavenly fire flower that used to be in the flower bed was no longer there. There were only a few messy withered leaves in its original place. Himu! Himu! She called out. Manager Himu had been following behind her worriedly. When he heard her call, he hurriedly showed himself. Your subordinate is here. What about the flower? Himu, what about the flower? Her voice trembled slightly. Manager Himu looked at the flower bed in a daze. It was still fine a few days ago. Your subordinate doesn't know how it disappeared. Chapter 1767. Strange. Although the heavenly fire flower was rare, it didn't have any use. Who would steal it? Go and investigate. Shuema only gave this order, and Himu left as if his boat was on fire. She slowly walked to the place where the heavenly fire flower used to grow. She slowly squatted down and paused for a moment. Then, she used her hands to dig at the soil. He treasured the flower so much that day. Perhaps it had some use, but she destroyed the entire area. Only one flower was left. Now that he was gone, was the flower also going to disappear? She came here directly, hoping to find some hope from the flower. She didn't expect that even this hope would be lost. She unwillingly dug at the ground with her hands, but she didn't find anything. Other than the few dried leaves on the ground, she couldn't find anything else related to the flower. She stood up with her hands full of mud and looked at the flower bed in a daze. She seemed to see him standing there, taking care of the flower. Almighty! She reached out to hug him, but she hugged nothing. Illusion, it was just an illusion. She stood there like a fool for a moment. Then, she bent down to pick up a dried leaf. The leaf was so dried that there was no green at all. It was as if it had been baked by the scorching sun many times. She raised her hand and carefully touched the leaf, afraid that she would accidentally drop it. A leaf was a leaf, and it was a dried leaf. She closed her eyes slightly and carefully put the leaf into her storage space. She then studied the soil in the flower bed. The soil here was no different from other places. She could almost study all kinds of chemical composition, but she still couldn't find anything. However, the heavenly fire flower could only grow here. Perhaps there was a special reason for it. Shenjuli should know, but it was a pity that he would never tell her personally. She stood up and looked around. The courtyard was empty. After Shenjuli left, Butler Himu didn't let anyone else live here. It had been empty all this time. Too much time had passed, and she had thrown away everything related to him, so she couldn't smell any of his scent here. She walked into the house again. The house was also empty. She couldn't find anything related to him. She looked at her hands. She was so decisive at that time. It was unusually clean. Now, it was difficult for her to find anything that belonged to him in this house. She sat on the bed. This bed was not the one she had slept on before. It was just an ordinary wooden bed, and it was a little uncomfortable to sit on. She sat on the bed for a long time with her eyes lowered. No one knew what she was thinking, or perhaps, until now, her mind was still in a mess, and she hadn't found a real clue. She knew that she should go to Fantion Palace to see her son, but she didn't know how to face him furthermore. Her mental state was extremely weak right now. Her eyes were extremely dry, her head was extremely painful, and her heart was extremely stuffy. After all, her heart meridian had just been broken. Just moving a little more would cause her heart to hurt. It hurt so much that it felt like it was going to break again. She couldn't let it break, and she didn't want to die. His wish was for her to live well. How could she not comply with his wish? Therefore, no matter how difficult it was, she would try to survive. She had to adjust her mentality before meeting her son. Otherwise, he would be even sadder to see her like this. Chapter 1768. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know that she was as pale as a ghost. She waved her sleeves, and a set of bedding appeared on the bed. It was exactly the same as the one Shenjuli had used before. Yes, although she was disgusted at that time and wanted to chase him away, she had only been here once. But strangely, she remembered all the decorations in his room, including the color of the bedding. Now, she made a new set of bedding and crawled into the bed. She hugged the bedding tightly and fell asleep in a daze. She didn't know how long she slept. When she woke up again, it was already a day later. She stretched her arms and legs and sat up on the bed. Then she looked out of the window in a daze. This room was really too small. It wasn't even 1/3 the size of her bedroom. Naturally, it couldn't be compared to his bedroom in the Sun Moon sect. The room was narrow and small. It must have been hard for someone like him to be cooped up in such a small space for more than a month without any complaints. There were many things that she couldn't think about in the past. Whenever she thought about it, her heart would hurt, as if it was being torn apart. She hugged the bedding and thought, why didn't I treat him a little better back then? Even if it was just a little bit. The bedding didn't have his scent. Even if she hugged it, her heart would still feel empty. She lowered her head and thought for a while. In the end, she didn't give up and carefully searched the room for a long time. Her efforts paid off. She finally found something related to him. It was a small piece of cloth with a drop of blood on it. It should have been left behind when he was injured. She found it in a crack in the room. She felt as if she had found a treasure. She gently held the piece of cloth, that was no bigger than a fingernail, in her palm. There was a little bit of his scent on it, but it was just a little bit. She held the piece of cloth in her palm for a long time. Then she put it in her storage space. Shuema felt that she was probably suffering from hysteria. She wandered around the Mo Palace like a wandering ghost for an entire day. She went to all the places he had been before, searching for anything related to him, as if she was searching for treasures. Unfortunately, she was too heartless at that time. After breaking off the engagement with him, in order to cut off all his thoughts, she destroyed or threw away everything that belonged to him. Now it was very difficult to find them even if she wanted to. However, He had lived here for more than a month after all. If she looked carefully, she could still find some clues, such as the cup he used to drink from, the vase he used to put in, and even the dried flowers he gave her that she casually threw into the trash can. Those things were small and insignificant, and most of them no longer had the aura he once left behind. However, as long as he had touched them, she could not help but collect them. When he gave her flowers, she had never seen them before. She had no idea what kind of flowers they were. At that time he sent her flowers every day. She only thought that it was a way for him to pick up girls. Now that she thought about it, he was so persistent in sending her flowers. Perhaps he had a purpose. These flowers might have some special meaning. Because too much time had passed, the flowers that were once thrown into the trash can no longer exist. She summoned Manager Himu and asked him where the trash was dumped. Then she went straight there. After rummaging through the trash, she finally found some flowers. Of course, flowers were delicate things. After being thrown into the trash for so long, most of them had already rotted away. She searched for a long time, and only found a few petals, or a single branch. She could barely see their original appearance. She studied each one for a while, but still couldn't find anything. Chapter 1769. She pondered for a moment, and turned to ask Himu, who had been following beside her. Who is the one who knows these flowers the best in the 6 realms? Himu was very knowledgeable, so he immediately answered, Mother Earth. Shuema did not know much about the people in this world, so naturally, she did not know who Mother Earth was. She casually ordered, Go and summon Mother Earth. I want to ask her something. Manager Himu was in a dilemma. Devil Master, Mother Earth does not belong to the 6 realms. She does not listen to anyone. She cannot leave the land. If you want to see her, you have to find her yourself. The place where Mother Earth lived was a little special. It was deep underground. To find her, one had to use the Earth Escape technique to drill dozens of miles into the soil. In the middle, one had to pass through several layers of rock and magma. It was very difficult. Even with Yi Tianli's high level of kung fu, he would have to put in a lot of effort to enter her underground palace. He would have to shed a layer of skin just to find her. Although Shuema's kung fu was much higher than Yi Tianli's, she had just reconnected her heart. If she went there now, she would probably lose her life. Her life was exchanged for Bai Xinjiuli. It was very precious. She could not lose it, or else she would be sorry to him. Shuema placed the flowers, branches, leaves into her storage space. She planned to rest for a while before going to look for Mother Earth. Now she should go and see her son. When Shen Nianma was forced to return to Fantian Palace by his father, he still had a lot of resentment in his heart. He had promised to give him a month's leave, but it was cancelled because he and his mother went on an adventure. It was cancelled. Not only that, his father also gave him a lot of homework. The names of those homework assignments were relayed to him by Baizhe, the divine beast that guarded him. One by one, he said that if he didn't read and learn them well, he wouldn't be allowed to leave Fantian Palace. Shen Nianma was a smart child, but it would be difficult for him to memorize more than 1,000 books with more than 100,000 words. When Shen Nianma saw the books, he only felt that his head was buzzing. He wanted to bargain with his father, but the only directed audio spell that his father left for him had automatically burned. He could not contact his father for the time being. She was planning to bargain with her father when he returned, so that he could not torture children like this. This kind of force-feeding education was not right. It was not conducive to the healthy growth of children. After he returned to Fantian Palace, he flipped through the books. Most of them were written by his father. He didn't know when his father had written them. Shen Nianma was very annoyed when he saw the books in the room. To express his dissatisfaction, he deliberately picked out a few books that were written by his father and threw them on the ground. He left a bunch of small footprints on the books to represent his anger. Then, he ran out of the study room to play with the mythological beasts. He had a lot of fun that day, and it was the first time that he was allowed to play like this. He felt very happy, but at the same time, he was also a little worried. His mother had already contacted him and said that it was very safe, so he didn't have to worry. At that time, he was indeed relieved, but after playing for half a day, he thought of his mother again. When he tried to contact her again, he couldn't get in touch with her. The voice transmission talisman remained motionless, as if it was dead. This made him feel a little uneasy, but he did not take it to heart. Thanks to his father's force-feeding education, he knew that the voice transmission talisman did not work in some forbidden places. That place was very strange. His father and mother must have joined hands to explore that place, so it was not strange that they could not get in touch. Chapter 1770. Moreover, his father and mother were the strongest people in the world. With the two of them working together, what difficulties could they not overcome? What else could be difficult for them? After playing for a whole day, he still did not see his father come back until the sky was completely dark. He tried to contact his mother again, but he still could not reach her. However, he began to panic, as if he was about to lose the most important thing. It was a strange feeling. He did not know anything, but he began to feel sad and inexplicably wanted to cry. The 8 mythological beasts who stayed with him had their own duties. One of them could even cook. Among them, Tungshi was a master of cooking. Therefore, although Shun Nianma stayed alone in the Fantian Palace, he did not starve. Although the food cooked by Tungshi was not as good as his father's, it was still acceptable. Although Shun Nianma had been used to sleeping alone these days, he knew that his father was in the palace and was not far away from him. However, this time after dinner he played for a while. When his father did not come back, he began to feel uneasy. He tried to contact his mother again but failed. He could not help but want to run out of the palace to have a look. However, the distance between the Fantian Palace and the mortal realm was not ordinary. When he came back, the 8 mythological beasts were there to pick him up, but it took nearly a day. If he wanted to go there again, he was afraid that he would not be able to reach it in a short time. Moreover, his father had told him that he could not leave the Fantian Palace until he had memorized the books and really mastered them. The 8 mythological beasts were his guards, and also to monitor him. He could not leave the Fantian Palace for a while. He had no choice but to climb into bed and sleep. In his half-awake state, he seemed to see his father standing in front of his bed and looking at him. He was shocked. In his dream, he still remembered that he had not done his homework and thought that his father was there to punish him. Therefore, he decided to take the initiative. He pouted and looked as if he was about to cry. "Father, why are you only back now? I am afraid to be alone in the palace. Where is my mother? Is she okay now? What is the purple smoke? It can make animals crazy. Have you gotten rid of it?" He asked a series of questions in one breath. He thought that his father would at least answer him, but he did not expect that his father's figure began to gradually disappear. He jumped in fright and pounced forward, but he pounced on empty air. His body felt cold, and he woke up. His little heart was beating wildly. This was the first time he had dreamed of such a father. He didn't know why, but he broke out in a cold sweat. Her eyes stung, and she had the urge to cry out loud. Before he could come back to his senses, the Fantian Palace suddenly started raining heavily, and the sound of the rain was like the world was sobbing. He lay on the bed in a daze for a long time before running out barefoot. He went straight to his father's bedroom and banged on the door with all his might. "Father! Father!" The door of the bedroom was tightly shut. It was unusually cold, and there was no sign of it opening. His whole body was drenched, but he did not care and screamed desperately, "Father, please open the door. I am scared." Nianma was scared. "You're back, right?" He shouted over and over again until his throat was hoarse, but not a single person came out. Originally, in order to train his courage, his father would not open the door for him at night no matter how much he cried. Now it was the same. He scratched the door for a long time and suddenly found a problem. Originally, the door of the bedroom was always covered with a thin wizardry barrier, regardless of whether his father was there or not. As long as his father did not want to open the door for him, it was useless no matter how hard he scratched. However, the wizardry barrier was no longer there. Chapter 1771. As long as his father did not open the door for him, it would be useless no matter how hard he scratched. However, the wizardry barrier was no longer there. There was only a lock hanging on the door. Father. Shen Nianma stared at the lock for a moment. He was disappointed. His father had not returned yet. Otherwise, he would not have hung a lock outside. In the end, he did not give up. He jumped up and took off the lock. Then he pushed the door with all his might. The door creaked open. Shen Nianma's heart was beating fast. He had not been to his father's bedroom for a long time. Usually, his father would see him in the study room or the living room. He pushed the door open and walked in. The room was quiet. There was no one in the room. The bedding on the bed was neat and clean. The layout of the room had completely changed. The jade screen and the antique shelf were gone. Instead, there were rows of cabinets. In the cabinets, there were neatly arranged bottles of different sizes. Medicine bottles. Shen Nianmo recognized a few of them. They were similar to the golden sword medicine. He was naughty and playful, so he often bumped into things. It was normal for him to get bruised. Sometimes, when he bumped into things badly, his father would apply some of the ointment on him. It was very effective and almost relieved the pain. Usually, his father would put these things in his storage space. Why were they all here this time? There were so many of them. Moreover, each bottle was labeled with a name and a simple description of the effect. That tag was also in his father's handwriting. It was a beautiful and flamboyant handwriting, just like his father. Shen Nianma looked at the rows of medicine bottles in a daze. The bad feeling in his heart was getting stronger. He unconsciously walked around the room and felt that there was something missing, but he couldn't remember what it was at the moment. After thinking for a while, he rushed out again. Although he was young, he was a real genius. In addition, Shen Jili taught him well. Therefore, Shen Nianma could already set up a wizardry barrier at a young age. Although it was raining heavily outside, if he did not want to get wet, he could still set up a wizardry barrier to avoid the rain. However, he was too anxious at this time. He did not care about the rain and ran back to his bedroom. She hurriedly opened her wardrobe and was stunned. Inside his wardrobe was a small storage space. At this moment, there were rows of his clothes, underwear, outerwear, training clothes. There were hundreds of them. In the future, he could wear whatever he wanted to wear, as many as he wanted to wear. Shen Nianma always had a bad habit. He was unwilling to wash his dirty clothes. He often wanted to throw them to his father, saying that he was still young. It was enough for his father to not let him carry and comfort him. Therefore, his father should wash his clothes for him. Anyway, it was just a matter of a cleaning spell. However, in order to train his self-care ability, his father never washed his clothes. He even prepared very few clothes for him, only 3 sets of clothes. If he wore one set, he had to wash it himself. If he didn't know the cleansing spell, he had to wash it by the lake. Shen Nianma was also angry. He said that he did not want to wash his clothes, but he did not wash them. He deliberately walked in front of his father like a dirty monkey. As a result, he was thrown out by his father into various mud pits, which made him roll on the ground like a mud monkey. Shen Nianma could not stand being so dirty, so he had to wash his clothes with resentment. Of course, he was very active in practicing the cleansing spell. Chapter 1772. Now that he had almost practiced the cleansing spell, although he might not be able to make it as spotless as his father, he could still remove the obvious stains. Why did his father suddenly prepare so many clothes for him? He ran over to take a look. There was even a natural silk robe that he desperately wanted at that time. In the cupboard under his clothes, there were some new toys that he liked to play with. However, his father did not let him play with them. These toys were strange. There were wooden birds that could fly, slingshots, guns. There were also some that he could not name. They were all placed in the cupboard, as if waiting for the young master to play with them. Shen Nianma was stunned. He did not see these things before he went to bed. He clearly remembered that he had changed his clothes after he came back from the other continent. At that time, the cupboard was still normal. How could there be so many new things after he woke up? Was his father back? He secretly left something for him, and then left? Father! 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 Shen Nianmo rushed out of the door and began to wander around the Fantian Palace to look for his father. He shouted while looking for him. The 8 mythological beasts were all attracted by his shouting. Shen Nianmo naturally asked if they had seen his father. Unexpectedly, the 8 mythological beasts shook their heads. No, little master, the Divine Lord did not come back. Yes, little master. If the Divine Lord came back, we would be the first to know. Little master, don't shout. The Divine Lord did not come back. The 8 mythological beasts tried to persuade him. Shen Nianmo naturally did not listen. If his father did not come back, then what was going on in his cupboard? His father must have come back. He ran wildly in the heavy rain for the whole night and went everywhere. However, he still could not find any trace of his father. He stood in the courtyard with his whole body wet. The fear in his heart was overwhelming, but he did not dare to cry out loud. It seemed that if he cried out, the things that he did not dare to think about in his heart would become a reality. He was stunned for a moment. Suddenly an idea came to his mind. His father did not come out now. Perhaps it was to punish him for not studying. He desperately tried to find a reason for his father not to appear, then ran back to the study. The book he threw on the floor was still there, and there were even a few pages with his small footprints on them. He quickly picked them up and stacked them neatly. He even washed his hands to freshen himself up. Then he spoke to the void. Father, Nianmo is obedient now. I am going to study now. You can come out now. I will study hard and practice hard, so that my father will not worry about me anymore. It was quiet all around. Naturally, his father did not come out. Father, come out. Nianmo's cleaning skill had improved again. If you don't believe me, you can come out and take a look. Nianmo's clothes were wet just now, but now I can dry them in the blink of an eye. You can come out and check on him. Shen Nianmo racked his brains to think of a way to force his father to show up. However, he thought of no less than a dozen possibilities, but there was still no movement. He had been running in the heavy rain for the entire night, so he felt a little dizzy at the moment. He touched his head and pursed his lips. Father, Nianmo has a fever. I am sick. He plopped down on the carpet and panted a few times with a red face. Father, Nianmo is very uncomfortable. Father, come out and give me a hug. The wind blew in from the window, making the curtains dance. It also blew on Shen Nianmo's body. Chapter 1773. The wind blew in from the window and made the curtains dance. It also blew on Shen Nianmo's body. He shuddered and looked around anxiously. Although his kung fu was good, he was still only 2 or 3 years old. He was also very cute, so he looked very cute when he was lying there. It made people want to kiss and hug him. This was his trump card. When he was too naughty and caused his father to be unhappy and ignore him, he would use this move to prevent his father from punishing him. His father would often lose his cool and come to see him, touch his forehead, or even pick him up and pat him in his arms. His father's medical skills were amazing. Naturally, he would quickly find out that he was pretending to be sick. Therefore, he would often punish him even more severely. For example, he would punish him to run 10 laps around the Fantian Palace. When he found out that he was lying, he would make him run 20 or 30 laps. Shen Nianmo was so punished that he would cry for his father and mother. He did not dare to use this trick to tease his father. He did not know if his father had seen through his little trick, or he really did not come back. After waiting for a long time, he still did not get a hug from his father. He pursed his lips and cried, Father, it's true this time. Nianmo is sick. Father, come out and hug me. He lay on the ground and cried until his voice was hoarse. In the end, he even threatened, Father, if you don't come out, I will cry myself to death here. If you come out, I will not cry. If you come out, I will be willing to run 30 laps. Of course, his father did not come out. He would never come out again. He did have a fever. The more he cried, the heavier his head became. He cried and cried until he fell asleep. He really had a fever. The fever made him dizzy. When he woke up, he called his father and said that he was not lying. He opened his little hands and waited for his father to hug him. Originally, the 8 mythological beasts were not allowed to enter the study. However, Shen Nianmo cried for too long and did not come out to eat. The 8 mythological beasts called him from outside, but he did not respond. In the end, the 8 mythological beasts had no choice but to let Bai Zhe, who was more sensitive, in to see how the young master was doing. As soon as Bai Zhe went in, he saw Shen Nianma lying on the ground with a red face. He was shocked and quickly carried him. His small body was burning like charcoal, causing Bai Zhe to tremble. The 8 mythical beasts could transform into anything. In fact, all of them had the ability to transform into humans. However, unless it was absolutely necessary, the supreme divinity would not allow them to transform into humans. Moreover, these mythological beasts also believed that their original forms were the most beautiful and were unwilling to appear in other forms. Therefore, they usually stayed in their original form when they were with Shen Nianma. It was not easy for them to carry a baby in their beast form, so Bai Zhe had no choice but to transform into a human. Bai Zhe's human form was extremely beautiful. His white robe was elegant and charming, and he looked very scholarly. Shen Nianma opened his eyes in a daze and saw a white robe. He immediately grabbed it tightly. "Father! Father! You finally appeared." Bai Zhe was scared out of his wits. He did not dare to pretend to be a divine lord, so he quickly explained, "Little master, I'm Bai Zhe, not a divine lord." However, Shen Nianma was already in a daze due to the fever. He still refused to let go of his father. "Father, Nianma is sick. Don't leave me." Bai Zhe had no choice but to carry him out and try to reduce his fever. Fortunately, before the supreme divinity left the Fantian Palace, she had given Bai Zhe some medicine. It was mainly used to treat children's illnesses. Chapter 1774. Bai Zhe had to admit that the Divine Lord's medicine was very effective. Not long after Bai Zhe fed him the medicine, his fever gradually subsided. Shen Nianma woke up and looked at Bai Zhe, who was guarding his bed. He could not stop crying. He was so sick this time, but his father still did not appear. His father was so cruel. Shen Nianma was very frustrated. He had used all kinds of tricks to force his father out, but he still could not force his father to come out. He had been lying on the bed for a long time. He did not want to eat or drink anything. Bai Zhe did not dare to force him. It had to ask the flying serpent, who was good at cooking, to make a lot of delicious food. It wanted to let this grumpy little brat have a good meal. However, Shen Nianma was determined this time. He pursed his lips tightly and said that he would not eat. He wanted to force Shen Juli to come out by going on a hunger strike. He would be happy even if his father came out and gave him a good spanking. In just 3 days, the little guy was very sick. He had the physique of a demigod, so it was not a big deal even if he did not eat or drink. However, he was still a child after all. He was usually a little foodie, so he could cry if he did not eat. Therefore, when he did not eat for 3 days, the 8 mythological beasts were very anxious. They were worried that something bad would happen to him due to hunger. Just when he was feeling helpless, there was a movement at the gate of the palace. It seemed that someone had come in. The gate of the Fantian Palace was usually closed to the outside, so outsiders could not come in. Who was it that came in at this time? Shen Nianma, who was lying on the bed and looked like he was about to die, suddenly jumped up and ran out. "Father!" Xiuema had just opened the gate of the Fantian Palace and walked in when she saw Shen Nianma rushing over like a small cannonball. "Father!" However, when he saw who it was, he was stunned for a moment. However, he quickly rushed over. "Mother!" Xiuema's footsteps paused, and her heart suddenly twisted. She tightly held him in her arms. After not seeing him for 3 days, the little guy had lost a lot of weight. His eye sockets were sunken in, and his originally tender and delicate skin had become somewhat pale and shriveled. She subconsciously felt the little fellow's pulse. "Are you sick?" After waiting for 3 days, Shen Nianma finally found a family member. Naturally, he would not let go of her. He pressed his face against Xiuema's face and pouted, as if he was about to cry. "I was drenched and fell sick. Why didn't father come out to see Nianma?" Xiuema hugged him tightly. His unintentional words were like a knife stirring in Xiuema's heart. She kissed her son. "Come, mother will take a look at you." She carried him and walked inside. Shen Nianma's eyes were looking behind her, as if he was trying to find someone else. Mother, where is father? You didn't come back together. Xiaoma paused for a moment. Your father is injured. He's recuperating in seclusion. He won't be back for the time being. In the end, she still couldn't bear to tell her son about Shen Jiuli's actual situation. The child was still too young. It would be too cruel to tell him such an outcome. Moreover, she didn't believe that Shen Jiuli would really disappear. She had died twice, and even her soul was scattered once. Didn't she come back in one piece? Perhaps Shen Jiuli was the same. This time, it might be a trial for him. His soul was scattered here, and perhaps he was reborn somewhere else. Perhaps he was now looking for the way to the celestial devil continent. He would come back. It was just a matter of time. Didn't he say that it would be 1,000 years? Although he had erased her memory a few times, he had never lied to her. It must be the same this time. Since he said that he would come back after 1,000 years, he would definitely come back. Chapter 1775. Shen Jiuli, you have to come back. You can't break your promise to me and my daughter. Shen Yichen's promise was worth a lot of money, wasn't it? However, Shen Nianma was not as gullible as other children. He widened his eyes and asked, Father is injured? Is it serious? Where is he? Xiaoma put him on the bed and rubbed his head. It is a little serious, so he needs to be isolated. As for the location of his seclusion, your father has never told anyone about it. Don't worry, Nianma. When he recovers, he will come back to see you. Shen Nianma blinked his eyes and still did not give up. Where else is better than the Fantian Palace? It is full of spiritual power and quiet. No one will disturb him. Is father afraid that Nianma will disturb him? Is that why he won't come back? Nianma will be good and will not disturb him. Mother, I miss father. Can you ask him to come back? She felt as if there were countless needles pricking her heart, but she could not show it in front of her son. Xiaoma kissed her son's little face. Good boy, Nianma. Get well first. She was also a doctor. When she felt her son's pulse, she knew that he had caught a cold. She was good at treating this. She was busy with the child. She was now the child's mother. She could not afford to be sad and dispirited. No matter how painful it was, she could only cry in a quiet place. She could not be weak in front of her child. After all, Shen Nianma was still a child. When his parents were not around, he would feel lonely and afraid. Now that his mother was back by his side, his heart finally calmed down a little. He held Xiaoma's arm and asked, Mother, father came back 3 days ago and brought so many clothes and toys for Nianma. But he did not see Nianma. Xiaoma's arm stiffened slightly, and her heart suddenly jumped. 3 days ago, Shen Jiuli had just passed away. Did he come back? Your father has always loved you. What clothes and toys did he send you? Shen Nianma told her about his wardrobe. Xiaoma did not speak. She slowly walked to the wardrobe and opened it. She looked at the small clothes and played with them for a moment. Shen Nianma might not understand, but Gu Shijio did. These things were prepared by Shen Jiuli a long time ago. However, he set up a small wizardry barrier here. When he was alive, with the wizardry barrier, Shen Nianma would not be able to find the things in the wizardry barrier. Once he died, all the barriers he had set up would disappear, and the child would naturally be able to see them. It seemed that he had prepared everything in advance. Strange, the eruption of Zisha also happened suddenly. Could he have predicted it in advance? Did she foresee where he would immortalize? She knew that Shen Jiuli's fortune-telling ability was extremely powerful. In her previous life, he had never made a mistake in his fortune-telling. However, didn't he also say that fortune-tellers shouldn't tell their own fortunes? Not only was he unable to divine his own future, he was also unable to divine hers. How could he have predicted this in advance? She thought of Shen Jiuli's many strange behaviors when he was sealing Zisha, such as the first time he wore such a robe, his indifference to her, and his distance from her. It was as if he had predicted the outcome in advance and reacted accordingly. When he first came to the celestial devil continent, he still wanted to pursue her again. He did not hesitate to lower himself to live in her small courtyard and send her flowers every day regardless of rain or shine. She tried all ways to force him to break off the engagement, and even used the method of marrying a concubine to make things difficult for him. Chapter 1776. She tried her best to force him to break off the engagement. She even tried to make things difficult for him by making him a concubine. When he agreed to break off the engagement at that time, it was more like a retreat in order to advance. Otherwise, he would not have tried so hard to persuade her to come to the Fantion Palace after his identity as the Divine Lord was exposed. Of course, he was not really cold to her. The real coldness seemed to have begun when he returned to the Fantion Palace. Could it be that he had recovered some of his memories in the Fantion Palace? Did he know that he would not live for long? Was that why he was cold to her? Perhaps there were some secrets hidden in the Fantion Palace. Shuima had always been a very calm person. Previously, Shenjuli's disappearance made her panic. Now as time went by, she slowly calmed down and tried to analyze it seriously. Mother, did father come back? Little Nianma looked at his mother, who was lost in thought. Shuima secretly took a breath and turned around. Yes, your father came back. He will be in isolation for a long time. He is worried about you, so he brought you these things. Nianma, you must be good. Don't let your father down. Look at your little face. Come, eat something and sleep. Little Nianma finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had been tossing and turning these past few days, and was indeed tired. Now that his mother was by his side watching over him, his heart had some support. What's more, he had also received news from his father. His little heart that had been on edge for a long time finally relaxed a little. Sure enough, after eating some things he fell asleep. After settling him down, Shuima sat in front of his bed for a while, and then walked out. After thinking about it, she went directly to Shenjuli's bedroom. This was the first time she entered his bedroom in the Fantion Palace. The layout was quite similar to his bedroom on the Lotus Hill. Even the appearance of the bed was similar. It was a lotus white jade bed. The clean bedding, the clean room, the familiar environment, and the lingering familiar smell made Shuima's eyes slightly dry. There seemed to be something surging in her chest. Her throat was blocked, but she did not cry. She had already shed all her tears in those 3 days. Now, no matter how sad she was, she couldn't shed a single tear. Her gaze landed on the rows of medicine bottles. She recognized most of them, some of which she had even obtained before. These were all things from Shenjuli's storage space. At that time, no matter what kind of injury or strange illness she suffered from, he would conjure the right medicine for her to take and apply it for her. Some of the commonly used small bottles could be felt with her eyes closed. She remembered that when she asked him out of curiosity how much medicine he had on him, and how many good things he had on him, he would rub her hair and say, "Take a guess." Now, she didn't have to guess anymore, because all the medicines were placed here. There were more than 1,000 kinds, and it was a dazzling array. There was even an alchemy cauldron in the corner. It looked ancient and full of charm. There were 2 books beside the cauldron. He took the 2 books and took a look. The books recorded all kinds of alchemy rules, and they were extremely detailed and comprehensive. The words on the books were also his handwriting. It was so familiar that it seemed to be carved into her heart with a knife. There was no need to ask. These alchemy rules were left for her by him. Looking at the ink, it was also new, less than a month old. She held the 2 books and slightly closed her eyes. Shenjuli, you've really prepared everything for your funeral. Monday, roll tickets. Chapter 1777. Shenjuli, you've really prepared everything for your funeral, just like your usual strict temperament. However, why didn't you tell me if you had already anticipated this? If I had known that sealing the egg would cost your life, I would have joined hands with you from the beginning. No matter how difficult it was for you, I would have stuck by your side. If that was the case, would the final outcome be different? A person would be particularly strong after having a child. If it were not for little Nianma, she might have been so dispirited that she did not even want to live anymore. However, with little Nianma by her side, for the sake of the child, she had to hold on no matter how bitter her heart was. She had been rushing for the past few days. At the moment she was exhausted. However, She looked at the big bed and pursed her lips. She did not want to lie on it. Shunjiuli, I will wait for you to come back and give me a status. I have been entangled with you for so long, and we even have a child together. However, you have never sincerely said that you would marry me. If you don't come back, I will not sleep in your room or your bed. She turned and left his bedroom. She walked around nearby and tidied up a side chamber. She casually made a bed and lay on it. She wanted to rest first. Initially, she wanted to take a nap on the bed. However, she did not expect to fall asleep so sweetly. In a trance, she seemed to have a bunch of messy dreams. There were countless scenes in the dream. In the dream, she climbed out of an egg. Her legs were weak, and she could not stand steadily. Her heart was full of hunger. She could not wait to bite her own eggshell. Out of nowhere, a hungry wolf appeared and bared its fangs to bite her. She was born with a kind of strength, so she did not know how to be afraid. When the wolf pounced on her, she threw herself on the wolf and directly tore its neck with her small hands. She leaned on its neck and drank its blood. The hungry wolf was drunk in the blink of an eye. She wiped her mouth and got up. It seemed that she was still hungry. She instinctively looked for food. Rabbits, bears, tigers, deer. She ate whatever she caught along the way. Of course, she only drank the blood and did not eat the meat. As she drank more and more blood, her mobility became stronger, and her running speed became faster and faster. The animals in the forest were no match for her at all. Perhaps it was because of her natural hostility. The wolves, insects, tigers, and leopards all ran away when she passed by, not daring to meet her face to face. At that time, she had just drunk the blood of a fat wild boar, and felt a little bloated, so she lay on a big tree and basked in the moonlight. Inadvertently, he saw an elephant in the distance, followed by a baby elephant. The baby elephant stretched out its small nose to drink milk from under the mother elephant from time to time, and the mother elephant patted it with her long nose. The scene looked very warm. She lowered her head and looked at herself. She was all alone, and no one came to care for her. For the first time, her little heart was not troubled by hunger. For the first time, she longed for something other than blood. For example, the desire to be caressed, the desire to be embraced. Of course, this desire didn't last long in her heart, because she was hungry again. She seemed to have a strong digestive ability. If she did not drink blood for half a day, she would be starving. However, she could not find anything to eat later on. After enduring for a day, she was so hungry that she was dizzy. When the poisonous sun shone on her, she was a little dazed. While she was lying on a big rock in a half-conscious state, she heard the sound of a zither. Although she was ignorant at that time, she could still listen to the sound of nature, and was intoxicated. For the first time in her life, she felt that the forest was very pleasing to the eye. The poisonous sun above her was also very beautiful. Chapter 1778. For the first time in her life, she felt that the forest was very pleasing to the eye. The poisonous sun above her head was also very beautiful. She ran towards the sound of the zither, and found a very pleasing-looking man in white sitting on top of a tall mountain rock. There was a zither on his lap, and the wonderful sound of the zither was coming from there. What made her even happier was that there were a lot of animals here. They were all around the big rock, shaking their heads and wagging their tails as they listened to the zither music. Thus, she unceremoniously pounced over. While pouncing on a deer, she lay on its body and sucked its blood, while perking up her small ears to listen to him play the zither. Just as she drank a few mouthfuls of the sweet blood, the zither music suddenly stopped. She looked up in surprise. Before she could see the person's movements, her small body flew up. After she crawled out of the eggshell, she had been running around the forest looking for food. She did not take a bath, and did not wear any clothes. At that time, she was still in a confused state, and thought that she was an animal. Which animal wore clothes? When her small body flew into the air, there was a flash of white light on her body, and the mud on her body disappeared. When she fell into the man's arms, there was an extra set of clothes on her body. There was a delicate fragrance on the man's body. It smelled very good. She leaned on his body and smelled it. Of course, She did not feel comfortable with the extra clothes on her body, so she stretched out her small hands to tear them off. Although she was small, she was very strong. The sturdy cloth was torn by her in the blink of an eye, and she became a naked doll again. Her arms and legs were free again, and her attention returned to him. The smell on his body was too good. She could not help but hold his hand and want to bite it. But he pinched her small mouth and she could not bite it. He stared at her ruby-like eyes and frowned slightly. Demon! It was the first time she heard a human voice, so she followed his voice and said the first word. Demon? He smiled slightly, and his eyelashes curved slightly. She felt that his smile was very beautiful, so she also smiled, and her eyelashes also curved. After laughing, she wanted to bite his hand. There is actually such a pure demon. Your pair of eyes are very beautiful. He raised his hand and stroked her head, smoothing out her messy hair. When she was born, her hair was very long. In just a few days, it had grown long, almost reaching her ankles. Using his hand as a pair of scissors, he trimmed her hair. The front of her hair was neat, covering her full forehead, revealing only a pair of ruby-like eyes. Who are your parents? He asked, his voice as melodious as a cello. She did not understand what he was saying. She was very obsessed with his blood, and still tried to bite his hand, wanting to suck his blood. His hand pressed on her back, and she didn't know what he was probing. Then, he looked at her with some surprise in his eyes. You're actually a natural-born devil. His fingertips emitted a white light, as if he wanted to do something to her. She felt that the white light was very beautiful, so she smiled at him with curved eyelashes, revealing a pair of small canine teeth and a pair of small dimples. The man's finger paused, and he looked at her with a complicated gaze. A moment later, the white light on his finger disappeared, and he sighed. Since the heavens gave birth to you, there must be a reason. You're so cute, so you can't do much evil. He looked down at her, and she also looked up at him. Her big eyes blinked, and they were incomparably pure. There seemed to be a faint smile in his eyes. Little fellow, you probably don't have a name. Why don't I give you a name? Chapter 1779. She didn't understand, so her eyes were still staring at his finger. She curled her lips and said, Hungry blood. This was the word she would say when she was born. Blood demon? The man looked at her bright red lips. Shwa. Emo. She repeated with her tongue stuck out. His eyes flashed slightly. Then let's call you Shuama. It's elegant, and it also alludes to your identity. She was so hungry that she couldn't stand it anymore. She didn't want to talk nonsense with him, mainly because she didn't understand. She tiptoed and wanted to bite his hand, but she couldn't bite it, so she settled for the next best thing. He turned his wrist and suddenly pointed at her forehead. You're so cute. It's not good to just suck blood. A drop of blood from his fingertip fell between her eyebrows. A white light flashed, and the drop of blood formed a cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. It was strange that after the cinnabar mole appeared between her eyebrows, the hunger that had been following her like a shadow disappeared. She also seemed to have gained intelligence. She suddenly learned to think and speak. She tilted her head and looked at him. Shuema. Well, from today onwards you'll be called Shuema. The man floated up, put away the zither, and put a set of clothes on her. It's not good for a little girl to be naked all the time. She stood on the ground, and for the first time, she didn't feel that wearing clothes was too ugly. She even turned a circle in front of him. He looked down at her. Do you want to go back to Fantion Palace with me? Or continue to stay here? She repeated the last sentence. Continue to stay here. He raised his hand and rubbed her head. You're right. You're born from heaven and earth, which is quite similar to me. It's better to be free. He led her to a mountain spring. Drink this when you're thirsty. He also hunted a few game, and taught her how to barbecue. Eat this when you're hungry. She blinked her eyes and learned from him. She learned quite quickly. Only when it came to barbecuing game did she have no talent. When it didn't taste good, she turned around and ran away angrily. After this scene, there were a few more fast-forwarded shots in quick succession. Iemo saw that the little girl no longer lived by sucking blood. She began to cultivate in the mountains. She was indeed a demon born from the heavens and earth. She automatically absorbed the essence of the sun and moon, thirsty to drink mountain spring water, hungry to eat barbecue game. Shenjuli came to see her every 10 days or so. He was quite capable. No matter where she hid, as long as he wanted to find her, he would be able to find her. He often brought her clothes and pastries that he made himself. He even taught her how to use the cleansing spell. Of course, he also taught her some life skills. Just like that, 3 years passed, and he suddenly stopped coming. She was already used to him, coming over every few days. When he didn't come for a long time, she would be disappointed and feel as if she had been abandoned. But after all, she was a devil born from heaven and earth. Even if he did not come, she would still grow very quickly. Although he wasn't very tall, he was very capable. There were a few monsters in the mountains who were curious about her. Occasionally, they would find an opportunity to bully her, but she beat them until they pissed their pants. Furthermore, she went straight to their cave abode and defeated all the demons in the cave abode. Then, she became the cave master of the cave abode and took in the demons as her underlings. After that, the shots changed faster. Every shot was a history of her battles. After every shot, she had more followers. However, Shenjuli's figure was no longer in these shots. The next time he appeared was on a sunny afternoon. Chapter 1780. At that time, she was sitting lazily in the arms of a handsome big demon. Behind her was a luxuriously decorated cave. Luminous pearls, emeralds, rubies, all kinds of shiny gems were embedded in the cave. Behind her were 4 subordinates who were massaging her shoulders and fanning her. Not far from her, there were also 4 other small demons who were roasting game for her. She was already the boss of this area. All the demons in the mountain area recognized her as the king. She lived a glorious life. Her life was very simple. She cultivated, ate, and beat people up. Whoever bullied her, she would beat them up. Whoever bullied her subordinates, she would beat them up. So as she beat them up, she became the boss of the people being beaten up. Her team was growing bigger and bigger like a rolling snowball. The demons that filled the mountains were all her subordinates. With more subordinates, it was inevitable that things would get messy. At that time, she was illiterate and naturally did not know how to manage things. She only knew how to teach those who disobeyed her a lesson. So as long as these subordinates did not offend her, it was fine. The others formed gangs and ran amok, making the area a mess. She did not know all these until he came. She was dozing off when she suddenly sensed something. She opened her eyes and looked into the sky. The person floating in the sky was an old friend that she had not seen for a long time. Shenjuli. He was still wearing his loose white clothes. His handsome features were more dazzling than the sun behind him. When the female demons in front and behind her saw him, they were all stunned. Those who were roasting forgot to roast, and those who were fanning forgot to fan themselves. His gaze did not look at anyone else, but directly fell on little Shuama's body. She was indeed young. After 100 years, she still looked like a 4 or 5-year-old child. Her eyelashes were unusually long, her eyes were unusually bright, and her facial features were exquisite like an ink painting. She used a big demon as a pillow and sat in his arms. He lowered his eyes and looked at her expressionlessly. She still recognized him. The moment she saw him, she smiled and showed her little dimples. She opened her little arms and asked for a hug. She liked to be hugged by others. Ever since Shenjuli hugged her in the beginning, she would always open her arms for him to hug whenever he came. He also habitually picked her up and held her in his arms to teach her some knowledge. After this habit was formed, he stopped coming. Therefore, she would find someone else to carry her, such as a great demon by her side. Furthermore, she had to find a great demon that looked pleasing to the eye to carry her. She had let many big demons hug her, but she always felt that no big demon's hug could make her feel more at ease and comfortable than his. Now that she saw him again, she immediately remembered the comfort of his embrace, and habitually opened her arms to him. A faint light flashed in his eyes. With a wave of his sleeve, her small body flew up and spun in the air. After the faint white light of the cleansing spell flashed, she fell into his arms. She immediately wrapped her arms around his neck and sniffed his body. She liked the smell of his body. With such a soft and cute child in his arms, his expressionless face showed a hint of helplessness, and the lines on his face finally softened. He touched her arms and legs and said to himself, "Why are you still so young?" She ignored his surprise and was very happy to see him. She pulled his hand and pulled him into her cave. He did not refuse and followed her in. He was almost blinded by the colorful gems in the cave. Chapter 1781. This cave was obviously the nest she was living in now. It could only be described with one word: colorful. All kinds of gemstones were embedded in the walls of the cave. Even her bed was covered with gemstones. She stood proudly on the ground, desperately looking up at him. She tugged at his sleeve, waiting for him to praise her. Shenjuli's lips twitched slightly. Which nouveau riche designed such a dazzling design? He looked down at the little girl beside him who was blinking her big eyes. He felt that he had found the reason why she could not grow up. How could she sleep well if she slept in such a dazzling place every day? If a child could not sleep well, they would not grow up. He looked down at her and rubbed his eyebrows. "I think it's time to teach you how to read." He looked at her as if he was looking at a small white poplar that was supposed to grow into a towering tree that was running towards the crooked tree. She opened her arms and wanted him to hug her again, but he shook his head. He felt that he had raised this bad habit of hers. It had to be changed. Since it had to be changed, it had to be done by herself. He taught her that girls should not be hugged by others, especially by men. She was more obedient to him. And she also felt that other people's hugs were not as comfortable as his. He threatened her by saying that if he saw her being hugged by other men again, he would never hug her again. As expected, her bad habit of being hugged by others was cured. She did not let other big demons hug her anymore. Since then, he came more frequently. He still came once every 10 days or so. Every time he came, he would bring a set of books. Of course, every time he came, he would teach her how to read. She was no doubt a genius. She could read very fast and almost never forget. He could teach her hundreds of words a day. A few days later, she would be able to read books on her own. He did not teach her the principles of being a person. He let her understand everything by herself. He was delighted to find that as she became more knowledgeable, the dazzling layout of her house began to change silently. Those colorful gemstones gradually disappeared and were replaced by some interesting furniture. She liked luxury and shiny things, so her house was also close to the luxurious and stylish direction. This was not in line with his character, but he did not force her on this point. Everyone had their own taste. As long as there was taste, as long as there was style, it was fine. With this knowledge, her horizons were broadened. Her daily routine was no longer limited to eating, sleeping, and fighting. She began to try to manage her subordinates. For example, there were various kinds of assignments, such as infeffing subordinates big and small, and letting them perform their own duties. Nothing could be accomplished without rules, so she began to set them up slowly. He even slowly formulated some laws for the demons to abide by, of course. As long as she went out of the law, she would cross the bottom line of some great demons, and there would be an uprising against her. In the process of pacifying the rebellion, she also learned the art of war. Thus, she wrote more and more laws and orders, and they became more and more standardized. This demon region was finally no longer in a mess, and the demons were no longer blindly committing evil. Perhaps it was because she was a natural demon, but although her management methods and wisdom were becoming more and more mature, her growth was extremely slow. After thousands of years, she still looked like a 7 or 8-year-old girl. The little demons who had grown up with her were long gone. Demons were not immortal. Most demons only had slightly longer lifespans than humans. Chapter 1782. Demons were not immortal. Most demons had a lifespan that was only slightly longer than humans, but it was only 400 to 500 years. Of course, demons with high talent and good cultivation could seize the fortune of the sun and the moon, and they could cultivate into an immortal body for thousands of years. But those were rare, and they had all grown up a long time ago. They grew up to be great demons, married and had children, and even became grandmothers and grandfathers. She was the only one who still looked like a baby. She felt a little lonely. She had also asked Shenjuli, who often came to visit her, about this problem. Shenjuli touched her head. Shuema, you are a natural demon. You are different from other demons. It is normal for you to grow slowly. Don't worry. Shuema looked at him with her big round eyes. Is Julie also a natural demon? Did he grow slowly before? Shenjuli's eyes deepened slightly. He touched her head again, and did not say anything. He was the opposite of her. He was a natural god and grew very fast. He looked like this when he was born. Shenjuli did not tell her his full name, so she always called him Julie. It was the first time that a natural demon appeared in this world, so he did not know what the growth pattern of this demon was like. But although this little girl grew slowly, she still grew, didn't she? More than 1,000 years had passed, and she grew from a naked baby to a 4 or 5-year-old child. Maybe in a few thousand years, she would be able to become an adult. Although she was small, she was very intelligent. The demon world was gradually unified by her, and she became the demon king. Although she was a natural demon, her nature was not evil. Plus, Shenjuli the god taught her from time to time, so she did not do any big bad things. At that time, the 6 realms were still in chaos. From time to time, there would be wars between the realms, causing a bloody storm. Whoever had the hardest fist and the most ability would be the boss. The realms fought each other for a good territory, and blood flowed like a river. The demon realm couldn't defeat the celestial realm, so they came to the demon realm to take over the territory of the demon realm. They accidentally met Shuema and recognized her as a natural demon. If a devil wanted to become stronger, devouring its own kind was the fastest way. Therefore, the battle between devils was very fierce. There were several devil kings in the devil world, and the devil kings also fought with each other. One of the demon kings was relatively weak. His territory and underlings were snatched away by others, and he unintentionally escaped to the demon realm. When he saw the snow-white and tender little Shuema, his first thought was to devour her. What he didn't expect was that Shuema, this little girl, would have such a high level of demonic power. Instead of devouring her, he was beaten black and blue by her. Fortunately, she didn't know how to devour devils to increase her cultivation. Otherwise, this devil king would have died in her hands. Since he was no match for her, the demon king had the idea of tricking her into joining the demon race. He wanted to use her ability to seize territory for himself and restore his former glory. Although this devil king's ability was not great, his eloquence was very good. After a series of eloquent words, he finally persuaded the bored little demon king. She was not interested in becoming the king of the demon realm. What she was most interested in was that this abject devil king told her that the devil king, who occupied the largest territory in the demon realm, had a strange flower in his hands. This flower had the effect of making people grow. She was worried about her inability to grow, so this news was simply a timely rain for her. Therefore, without saying anything, she abandoned the demon realm on a rainy day and went directly to the demon realm. Chapter 1783. Little Shuema really lived up to his expectations. Not long after she came here, she took back the territory for the fallen devil king. The other devil kings were naturally dissatisfied and joined forces with other devil kings to suppress her. But her kung fu was not ordinary, and no one in the devil world was her opponent. The result of her crusade was that these demon kings were gradually taken care of by her. She was thinking about that strange flower. But the demon king who owned that strange flower was extremely powerful and had many experts under him. If she were to fight him alone, she would naturally be no match for him. Therefore, she needed to have a force that was on par with her. Therefore, she quietly took care of the other demon kings one by one. When the devil king reacted, the little devil kings in the devil world were almost cleaned up by her, and their little claws were reaching towards him. The biggest war in the history of the devil world was caused by the confrontation between little Shuema and the powerful devil king. After that war, the powerful devil king died in battle, and his territory and subordinates all belonged to Little Shuema. Little Shuema became the Devil King, and was respected as the Devil Lord, becoming the veritable king of the Devil world. These things were easy to say, but not easy to do. From the moment Little Shuema entered the Devil world until she unified the Devil world and became the Devil world's lord, she experienced thousands of years of bloody wind. After she entered the Devil world, she never saw Shenjuli again. She didn't know if he didn't find her, or he felt that she was enough to take care of herself, so he didn't look for her anymore. In the dead of night, she still missed his embrace. But the idea of growing up was firmly entrenched in her heart, so she couldn't care about anything else for the time being. She didn't know that the man in white who taught her growing up was a god, and she didn't know that he was actually standing on the opposite side of her. After she unified the Devil world, she finally got the strange flower. After eating it happily, she finally grew up in a month as she wished. From a 6 or 7-year-old little girl to a 12 or 13-year-old girl. She happily returned to the demon world, wanting to let Jiuli see her grown-up appearance. But after returning to the demon world, she remembered a very serious problem. She didn't know Jiuli's identity and origin, and she didn't know where he lived. He had always been the one looking for her, and she had never been able to find him. She had also asked around in the 6 realms, but no one knew who Jiuli was. It was as if he had really disappeared. She had waited in the demon realm for 3 years, searching for him for 3 years, but he never came back. He was truly missing from her life. She was now the king of the monster realm and demon realm. She could call the wind and summon the rain in the 6 realms. She was having a good time. The only thing that made her unhappy was that she didn't seem to be growing any longer. Originally, she had grown slowly, but at least she had grown. However, ever since she ate the flower and turned into a 12 or 13-year-old girl, she stopped growing. She didn't notice this problem at first. When she did, it was already another 500 years later. She hadn't grown a single centimeter in the past 500 years. What appeared in the mirror had always been that sweet little Loli. At first, she thought that the environment in the Devil world was not good, so she returned to the demon world. She lived in the demon world for another 500 years, but the reality still made her despair. She began to look everywhere for a way to grow up. She used all kinds of strange methods, but there was still no effect. One of her senior subordinates, a former Devil King, heard a special prescription from somewhere. He said that the Devil Lord's growth might be related to the imbalance of yin and yang. Chapter 1784. The Demon King also said that as long as she married someone, she might be able to break the curse of not being able to grow up. Other than the Devil Lord, this Demon King was one of the strongest in both the demon realm and the demon realm in terms of martial arts and fame. He said that because he wanted the Demon Lord to marry him. He also hinted to the Demon Lord that she should marry the strongest cultivator. The stronger the cultivator, the easier it would be for her to grow up. What he didn't expect was that although the Demon Lord believed his prescription, she didn't want to marry him. She was thinking about the man who helped her, but that man never appeared in her life again. She couldn't find him at all, so she turned her attention to the strongest cultivator in the 6 realms. At that time she was already very famous in the 6 realms. Even the celestial realm didn't dare to offend her. At that time, it was rumored that the most powerful cultivator in the 6 realms was the supreme god of the 36 layers of heaven. She thought that the supreme god might be good, but she didn't know if he was old or ugly, because the supreme god almost never appeared in the world. Even when he occasionally appeared in the 6 realms, he always wore a white jade mask. No one knew if the person behind the mask was ugly or not. Until one time, when she went to a flower appreciation party in the celestial realm, she happened to see the supreme god walking out of a door accompanied by the celestial emperor. At that moment, she felt like she was struck by lightning. At that moment she was overjoyed. Although he was wearing a mask, although the powerful divine aura around him caused everyone present to lower their heads and not dare to breathe, she still recognized him. Julie. So he was the supreme god. She was the demon lord. Since she came to the celestial palace, the Celestial Emperor had to give her face. Therefore, the Celestial Emperor walked to her and bowed to greet her. Her eyes fell on the Supreme God standing not far away. The Supreme Divinity was also looking at her. She couldn't see his expression under the mask, only his deep blue eyes that were as deep as a lake. When he looked at her, his eyes were calm. She couldn't tell if he recognized her or not. Xuema was no longer the ignorant child, who was born more than 2,000 years ago. Although she was still fierce, she wasn't reckless. She curled her eyelashes and greeted him. "Divine Lord, long time no see." The Supreme Divinity nodded faintly at her, then turned and left. She was still a little disappointed. To be honest, she still missed his embrace, but he didn't seem to recognize her anymore. It didn't matter. It would be the same even if she made him get to know her again. Therefore, she sent someone to propose to the Fanteon Palace of the 36th heaven. These things were all jumping scenes in Amo's dreams. In her dream, she knew that this was her past life, the past life that belonged to the Devil Lord Imo. Therefore, she stood in the void obediently as a spectator, and concluded from time to time. In fact, she had always wanted to know what happened to her 50,000 years ago. She didn't expect that she would be able to dream about it on the first day she came to Fanteon Palace. Although these dreams were a little messy, and sometimes they were even scattered all over the place, it was a good thing that she had a strong mind that was good at summarizing. She was actually able to organize these fragmented dreams in an orderly manner. The last dream was exceptionally clear. Gioli was playing chess alone on a cliff, when she suddenly appeared in front of his chessboard. "Divine Lord, have you made up your mind?" He didn't even raise his head. "Consider what?" Chapter 1785. "You didn't receive my marriage proposal?" She raised her eyebrows and sat down across from him. "I did. It's not bad to use as a piece of paper," he answered casually. "You..." She looked like she was about to get angry, but then she smiled and said, "It's okay. A gentleman is like jade, and a beauty is easy to find. It's okay if you're a little reserved. I won't give up." She sounded like a playboy who was flirting with a good girl in public. She was full of the spirit of an indomitable spirit to marry a beauty. "Pa." He put the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard and looked up at her, who was a head shorter than him. "You're quite brave." She picked up a black chess piece. She was small but high-spirited. "I've always been brave. There's nothing I can't get when I want to do something." Shenjuli looked indifferent. "Am I the thing you want?" She spun the chess piece on her fingertips and smiled like a blooming flower. "It's a slip of the tongue. You're the person I want. Why don't you consider my condition carefully? I'm very good looking, and I'm good at martial arts. I'm also a good match for you. Why are you dissatisfied with me? Why do you have to choose me?" Shenjili put down a white chess piece. "You're the strongest man in the world. When I, the Devil Lord, choose a son-in-law, I naturally have to find someone of equal social status who is worthy of me," she answered confidently. She didn't know why her words angered him. His face turned cold. "I'm not interested in you. You can leave." "Hey, what do you want to do to make you agree? Give me a straight answer." She was a little impatient. He no longer paid any attention to her, and continued to play chess. A crimson light flashed, and she slashed her sword at him on the chessboard. He lowered his head and seemed to have eyes. He waved his sleeve, and wrapped it around her sword. He waved it again, and she took a few steps back. He didn't say anything. He packed up the chessboard, and turned to leave. She didn't give up, and jumped in front of him to stop him. "What's wrong with me?" She was in such a hurry to stop him, that she almost fell into his arms. She hurriedly took a few steps back. She realized that she was too short, and needed to look up at him. Suddenly, she felt that she wasn't imposing enough. She jumped onto a rock next to her, and barely reached the same height as him, so that she could look into his eyes. Shinjuli didn't say anything. He just looked at the big rock under her feet, and then looked at her again. The corner of his mouth slightly hooked up. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was obvious. He seemed to dislike her for being short. Her small face blushed slightly, but she still raised her head to look at him. "Although I am a little short, as long as we get married, I will grow up." Shen Julie had wanted to leave, but he stopped when he heard her words. Can you grow up after getting married? Who told you that? You're in a hurry to get married because of this rumor? His tone was really not good. She seemed to feel that she had let it slip, so she rubbed her eyebrows in annoyance. You don't have to care who told me that. Just tell me, do you agree or not? If you agree, I won't let you suffer too much. I'll bring a large dowry. I heard that you are looking for the Mirage Pearl to make chess pieces. I have collected a set. If you agree to be my husband, I can give it to you as a betrothal gift. No, as a dowry. I don't need to live in your Fanteon palace. We only need to sleep together once a month. You can do whatever you want at other times. You can even take concubines. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.